This is a story about the strongest nine-circle mage, Lucas Trauman, who fought against demigods to protect humans, but in the end, these so-called fake gods were not able to defeat him. The gods were too scared of his powers, and they trapped Lucas inside an eternal torture chamber with his consciousness intact to suffer for eternity. Now, thousands of years have passed, and we see a weak boy getting bullied by his other three classmates. The boy who was getting beaten up was Frey Blake, the third son of the almighty Blake family, but he is the only exception in his family as he is very weak and has no magic. The bad student tells Frey that in tomorrow's sparring lessons he is his sparring partner, and he will not go easy on him. Frey wishes that he wants to become stronger at any cost, and suddenly Lucas hears a voice inside his head, but he is very shocked because he has never heard anything for years. He thinks that he started hallucinating, and finally he is losing his mind. On the other side, we see that Frey has been summoned by his father, and his father tells him to disappear from their lives, because Frey's father cannot overlook the fact that Frey is dirtying their family's honor. Frey asks his father if it's a sin to be weak, and his father says the Blake house does not accept individuals who are incapable of getting stronger. Now we see that Frey is inside his room, and he is planning to kill himself, but he is too scared to accept his death. On the other side, we see Lucas struggling even more inside the torture chamber. Lucas reviles himself again and says, "I will endure this hellish place as long as possible, if it's to punch your face." We see that Frey has finally taken his own life. But on the other hand, Lucas suddenly sees a path filled with light in front of him, and here Frey gives up on his life, wishing that only if he could become stronger. Now the seal put on Lucas was being released, and he was able to see Frey lying down on the ground, crying and wishing that if he could get another chance in life, he wanted to be powerful with the mightiest wings. Suddenly, Lucas wakes up in the body of Frey Blake. When he checks the calendar, he realizes that 4,000 years have already passed. Frey Blake is the world's weakest human. His body is possessed by the world's strongest mage to ever exist. Lucas says that since Frey gave up his life and gave me his body and freedom, I shall give him the title of the world's strongest. Guys, now that Lucas has accepted his identity as Frey Blake, I will also refer to him as Frey. Frey looks at the sky with a full moon and says, "Demigods, just wait, it won't take long. I will definitely get back at you." Now Frey starts to gather mana in his body to regain his strength and become even stronger than before, so he can fight against those demigods. After a whole night of practice, Frey realizes that he has reached the level of a 5-star magician. But suddenly, his body starts vomiting. The impurities that have accumulated within Frey's body have started to come out, so he uses his power to remove all of the impurities from his body. Now inside the school, we see that the bully kids were talking about how they were going to crush Frey in today's match, but another fatty tells us that he saw Frey buying lots of sleeping pills from the infirmary yesterday, and they started to joke about whether Frey would commit suicide or not. On the other side, we see that Frey had vomited a ton of blood to remove impurities from his body, and he was surprised to see this much impurity in a young child's body. Later that day, inside the Westrot Academy trainee canteen, all the students were surprised to see Frey gobbling up all the food like a glutton. In reality, Frey hadn't eaten anything for 4,000 years, which is why everything was super tasty to him. After eating food, Frey now thinks that he has to attend school with these kids, while his current age is 4,000 plus 50 years. But Lucas had to do this because he cannot know everything that happened in the last 4,000 years with Frey's memory alone. Frey now enters his class, but Bully Kid 1 stops him. Bully Kid 2 asks Frey to give him 10 lunch tickets, which he lost in a bet on whether Frey would commit suicide or not. As the fatty started to harass Frey, his body started to tremble, and Lucas realized that this was the memory of the real Frey, so this bully must be the reason why Frey took his own life. As the fatty was going to attack Frey, he quickly teleported behind the back of the fatty. The whole class was shocked to see how Frey suddenly fell behind the fatty, but one girl named Isabelle was able to see what Frey did. The fatty again attacks Frey, but Frey punches him at lightning speed, sending him flying. Frey is now pretty embarrassed because humanity's strongest mage just punched a little kid. But right now everyone else is in utter shock at Frey's actions. Professor Dio arrives on the scene, and he notices the traces of martial skill used with mana on the body of a fat. Professor Dio was shocked, as there shouldn't be anyone this talented, even among the professors. Professor Dio left to take care of Fatty, and the other bald-headed Professor Kevin will take today's class. Professor Kevin was a pervert, and he had very bad intentions for the female trainees, especially Isabelle. Professor Kevin notices that Frey is also present in his class today. The girls were talking to each other about how they really don't like Professor Kevin, that dirty pig who starts grinning whenever he sees a female student. Professor Kevin asks Frey how he came to attend his class today. Frey, who wasn't aware of Professor Kevin's behavior, asks for forgiveness and says, "Sorry, Professor, I was busy." The girls mumble to themselves that Frey doesn't attend his classes because he would bully him whenever he came. Professor Kevin asks Frey if he has more important things than his class. Frey cheerfully says, "Yes, you are right. I am at the age where children are sensitive to everything." The professor gets very angry, but he controls it and says, "Yes, you are right. I am not a condescending professor who thinks that my classes should be the top priority, but I have a question for you." The professor further tells Frey that if he is unable to answer even a single question, he will have to take responsibility for that defying attitude just now as a trainee at the academy. Professor Baldi asks him to name 3 items that were used by the magic warrior King Cassigen. Frey was shocked for a moment, and he asked, "Did you just say Cassigen?" Now we see the memory of Lucas from 4,000 years ago, a very strong martial artist who destroyed a whole fucking mountain with his one punch. Young Lucas comes from behind and tells him to do it moderately, otherwise you will erase all the mountains. At this rate, will you look after the wild animals after they lose their homes? The warrior who destroyed the mountain just now was none other than the magic warrior Cassigen, who was an old friend of Lucas Trauman. Cassigen serves him tea and goes back to training. Lucas asks him, "How will you get married when all you can do is train?" Cassigen taunts back and says, "You are the same. You don't understand women's hearts either." Cassigen says love and affection are evil thoughts. Those who can't tame their desires won't be able to stand, and a martial artist must see women as rocks. Lucas says, "As long as those rocks are pretty, I have no problems." Now, back to the present. All the students thought that Frey was fucked because this is not even clearly mentioned in the books. Isabel interrupts in between and argues that the question the professor just asked isn't related to the subject history of magecraft that they have seen in class. Isabel also argues that Cassigen was a martial artist. He only used mana to enhance his physical body, therefore, we cannot call him a magician. The professor comes disgustingly close to Isabel and says, "Are you insulting all the practitioners who are training the magic warrior techniques?" Frey was surprised to hear the word insulting and thought that when I called Cassigen a magic warrior, he would fight me to the death. The blonde professor touches Isabel's shoulder and says, "This is a very interesting topic. Do you want to have a debate in my laboratory, just the 2 of us?" But Isabel throws his hand away and tells him to stop this. The Professor Kevin asks Isabel the same question about the magic items used by Cassigen. But suddenly Frey says the Tiger King's glove, the Giant's belt, and the Gale necklace. Cassigen was a minimalist, so those were the only items that he used. Frey further says that I did tell Cassigen to pay more attention to fashion trends, but he didn't listen to me at all, especially with that old-fashioned necklace. All the students were looking at Frey with a surprised look on their faces, so Frey asks, "Am I wrong?" But the professor says, "No, you are correct," and he turns towards Isabel and says, "I believe that you lack respect and manners." He grabs Isabel's hand and says, "Follow me to my laboratory immediately." Frey Blake asks Professor Kevin if he knows what Cassigen used to say all the time. Feelings of love and affection are evil thoughts that can perturb a martial artist's composure. A martial artist must see women as mere rocks. Those who fall for their desires and forget their duties will not be able to stand straight on their feet and will degrade into creatures worse than lowly beasts. Professor Baldi asks Frey what he is trying to say, and Frey replies that he was thinking that maybe Cassigen was wrong after seeing how you are standing there perfectly on your feet. The professor gets pretty angry after hearing this and says, "Did you lose your mind after answering one question correctly? Let's see how long you can keep up that attitude. If you get even a single question wrong, you will be severely punished as a trainee at the academy." After a while, we see that the professor and the whole class were in utter shock because Frey answered all of the questions correctly. The professor was in utter shock because even the most senior professors at the academy didn't know about the history of the Light Ages. How can the worst trainee in the academy know so much? Frey now asks Baldi if he wants to ask any other question, as he is feeling quite hungry. Frey now goes towards the cafeteria, singing, "I will eat a whole lot of food," but we see that Isabel is also following her behind. After a while, Frey gets annoyed because of this and asks Isabel why she is following him, but Isabel simply replies that she is also going to eat her lunch. Now inside the cafeteria, Isabel is shocked to see so much food on the table put out by Frey, and she asks, "Will you truly eat all this food by yourself?" Frey says, "Try starving for 4,000 years. Each meal becomes a blessing afterwards." Isabel asks him what he means by not eating for 4,000 years, but Frey doesn't answer her, and asks, "Why have you been following me everywhere since earlier?" Isabel says, "Please don't misunderstand, there were simply not many empty seats." Isabel asks Frey, how is he so knowledgeable about the Light Ages when magecraft was at its peak? Frey realizes that magecraft hasn't developed in 4,000 years, but has actually regressed instead. Frey thinks that the demigod intervened. Isabel further tells us that the 4 great masters who brighten magecraft's history are the mightiest magic warrior Cassian, the great sage Dumbledore Potter, the black witch Iris Fistfounder, and finally the man hailed as the strongest mage and the man she aspires to rival, Lucas Trauman. Isabel further says that he was truly a great and incredible master, and if he were still alive, I would have asked for his hand in marriage. Frey suddenly choked on his food after hearing this and started laughing. Frey laughs and says that a little kid who has yet to fully grow up is talking about marriage. I will accept your feelings, but I am not interested in children. Isabel blushes very little and says, when have I asked for your hand in marriage? On the other side, all of the students were shocked to see that the proud Isabel, who always ranks in the academy's top 2, is swooning over Frey. A boy says that even the infamous David gets rejected every day by Isabel. We see that David is the same student who used to bully Frey, and he was standing there with his food while he was angrily looking at Frey, who was chatting with Isabel. Isabel now asks Frey about the last question about Dumbledore's 3 training methods, to which he answers assimilation, amplification, and battling. Isabel says that, however, she learned that Dumbledore's training methods were only assimilation and amplification. She asks Frey, will you give me the honor of learning the battling method you mentioned? Frey asks her about the stage she is currently at. Isabel says that she is a competent 3-star mage. Frey says, wow, you are quite talented to be a 3-star at your age. Isabel says she noticed this earlier, but you talk like someone who has lived for a very long time. To which Frey replies that indeed, I have lived for a long time. Isabel now asks him, are you not the same age as me? But now all of the food on the table is finished, and Frey takes all the plates and moves out, saying we will talk later. Isabel stops him and says, you have yet to answer my question, what kind of method is battling exactly? Frey now replies that you should read and learn it from books because what I have isn't knowledge but experience, so my answer might be biased. Isabel was shocked to hear that Frey had experience with all these things. After lunch was finished, all of the students gathered in the arena for a practical training session with 1 versus 1 magic battles. The teacher tells the student that, for the sake of fairness, only 1-star magic spells will be tolerated. The teacher further says that these will be real battles, so you will be held responsible for your own injuries. Frey asks who that professor is, and Isabel says, are you asking about Professor Jane? Frey says she is very gorgeous. Isabel shouts at Frey, saying, are you in your right mind? You are talking about a professor in her 40s. Frey tells Isabel that you should also watch her and learn what a perfect woman's beauty looks like. Isabel taunts Frey, saying that even your taste in women is old. Professor Jane announces that the first match is between trainee David and trainee Frey. David greets Frey and says, I couldn't sleep last night because of you. But Frey simply ignores him and walks past him. All of the students were shocked when they saw that Frey had taken Professor Jane in her arms, and Frey says, I now realize why I opened my eyes after my eternal slumber. It was all to meet you. Frey asks the professor, would you do me the honor of taking me out for dinner? Professor Jane was totally swooning over Frey, but she controlled herself and said, return to your position. This is my last warning. Frey suggests that if I win the match, will you take me out for dinner? Professor Jane says, Frey, you can only cast 1-star spells at best, and you are thinking about winning against 3-star David. Alright, if you win, I will treat you to dinner. David looks at Frey and says, it looks like you have gotten stronger in just 1 night. But don't worry, I will start off by destroying your vocal cords, and afterwards I will slowly break your limbs one at a time. You won't be able to tap out or cry out during the match. Frey says he doesn't think there are any I-star spells that inflict that much damage, though. Professor Jane now signals to begin the match. David uses a magic called Stone Rage, and a huge weapon conjures up in the sky made out of stones. Isabel objects. Professor Jane said that the rule was to use only 1-star spells. Professor Jane says he didn't break the rules. Isabel asks how that spell cannot violate the rules. Now David tells everyone that this magic is something that only the direct descendants of his family can use. It's called the Vision Magic. It's a powerful spell, and if the conditions are fulfilled, even a star magician can use it. Frey says Vision Magic is the same as the house symbol, and you are using that to bully people. In this new body, Frey uses a magic spell for the first time, and the spell is magic missiles. Frey thinks that the magic missile is glowing very nicely. David laughs at him and says, "Are you going to face the stone rage with a magic missile?" Frey shoots his magic missile towards David, and it breaks all of the stone weapons made by David and hits him so hard that he falls to the ground, totally immobilized. Everyone present in the arena was pretty shocked to see what happened just now. A single magic missile destroyed the stone rage spell. We see that Frey intentionally attacked David's throat and damaged his vocal cord. We see that there are two upperclassmen also present to watch the match. Frey now gives an evil smile and asks David, what was he saying earlier about destroying vocal cords and then slowly breaking the limbs one at a time? Frey fired the missile at David's leg and broke it. Frey was crying very pitifully in the agony. Frey asks what is wrong. This was your plan, right? Are you not feeling well? Isabel now says to Professor Jane, we already have a winner. I request that you bring this match to a halt. But Professor Jane says David hasn't declared his defeat. Isabel tries to argue that David's voice is destroyed. But Professor Jane tells Isabel, didn't I say so already? To fight the match while expecting a real battle. Frey now tells David, don't worry. I am not a bad guy like you, so I would just stop at your legs and I wouldn't break your hands. And he starts walking away. Frey suddenly turns around and says, but don't you have two legs? And now Frey breaks his other leg, also using a magic missile. The whole school was talking about how a trash student named Frey defeated a 3-star magician and sent him home with destroyed vocal cords and broken legs. There was a rumor going around that Frey might have made a contract with the devil. Now the upperclassmen who were spectating the fight proposed that Frey Blake join the True Amen Rings. The upperclassmen further say that, as a trainee at our academy, you must have heard of it, right? It's the assembly of trainees that represents Westrot Academy. It's not a gathering that anyone can join. Only those that they personally select have access to it. Frey was wondering if it could be called an invasion of privacy if they used your name without your permission. Frey declines the offer and says, I don't want to join the upperclassmen. He is in utter shock and says, are you insane? How could you not join the Trauman Rings? Another upperclassman named Peryuan Jun arrives there and says it's no use persuading him if he doesn't want to join. Peryuan introduces himself and says he is the manager of Trauman Rings, and he also wishes to invite trainee Frey to join Trauman Rings. Frey looks at him and thinks that his composure is impressive for someone of his age. But Frey still denies it and says I am not interested, and nothing will change even if I join that group. Now, in the nighttime inside a hotel, we see the Professor Jane wearing some pretty clothes, and she says to Frey that I promised to treat you to dinner. But how come there is one more mouth to feed? Isabel has also come in here following Frey, and Frey was urging her to leave the food and go away from here. Isabel politely says, please don't mind me. I definitely did not follow the two of you because I was worried. Frey now loses his mind and says, can't you just leave? There is a limit to how dense you can be. Isabel says no matter how much I searched, I didn't find any information on battling. What do you want me to do when even you are not teaching me? I have no choice but to follow you around until you do. Professor Jane interrupts and asks, are you talking about Cassigen's training method? Isabel shockingly asks, does Professor Jane know as well? Professor Jane says I have heard rumors of it in the Mage Institution, but no matter how much I looked through the records, I couldn't find it. Professor Jane further says that trainee Frey knows about this training method. If you are not bluffing, I would also like to hear more about it. Frey goes and puts her hands on Professor Jane's shoulder and says, instead of that, I can teach you more interesting things. Frey further says, what do you think we can do to continue this talk in your room? Professor Jane, who was getting totally seduced, wonders why she is reacting like this to a trainee who is 20 years younger. They both move their lips forward towards each other in the heat of the moment, and they kiss. But suddenly, before their lips can meet each other, Isabel interrupts and says, stop acting so shamefully towards the professor. Frey is now standing alone on the outside, and he wonders if the demigod were controlling the world. They would have surely erased all traces of his existence. But even after 4,000 years, the information of Cassigen Dumbledore, Iris, and him, Lucas Trauman, was barely distorted. Does this mean that there are still people following our will and fighting out there? Isabel was getting seduced by the looks of Frey in the night light. Frey asks Isabel, who is the Academy's strongest person? Isabel says, why should I answer you when you don't even answer my question? Frey says, I will tell you if you tell me. And Isabel gets very excited suddenly hearing this. She tells me that the strongest amongst the trainees is Peryuan Jun, and amongst the professors, it's Professor Dio Pulsman and Professor Adelia. However, the strongest person amongst them all is probably my aunt. Frey asks who your aunt is, and Professor Jane also arrives and says that trainee Isabel's aunt is Westrad Academy's director, Lady Cirrus Trisnine. Professor Mary Jane further tells us that she is a 6-star mage who has received the title Ice Synthesis from the Empire. Professor Mary Jane further says that a mage stage can theoretically go up to 9 stars, but the last person to reach that stage was 3,000 years ago. Moreover, there is still discussion about whether it is true or not, and they say that the highest stage that a mage can actually reach is 8 stars. There must have been fewer than 10 great mages who attained 8 stars throughout the entire world. So truthfully, reaching 9 stars is simply a legend. Frey guesses that the person who installed the spell that is protecting the academy was also the academy's director. Professor Jane says, I am not sure, but you are probably right. Frey looks at the protecting spell and thinks that it's not something a 6-star magician could have placed. Frey concludes that there is something amiss, and Cirrus Trisnine suggests that a woman may know something. Frey plans to ask Isabel to prepare a meeting between him and her aunt. But then he realizes that he doesn't know how far the demigod's influence reaches, so he cannot involve a little innocent child, and depending on the situation, he might have to suppress the academy's director. Frey says I should get 7 stars at least. Professor Jane says it will take 10 years if you are quick, but actually it would take more than 20 years. Frey says if I train hard enough, I should reach it by the time vacation ends. Professor Jane laughs and says, well, alright, who knows? Your bluff may become reality one day. It's good to dream big and aim high. Frey again goes into sexy mode and says, my dream isn't the only big thing, my love is huge as well. Will you check it for me? The bitch named Isabel again interrupts and says you should be careful from now on. If you keep acting shamefully toward the professor, I will report it to my aunt. Frey gets angry and says this is why I don't like little kids, and this time even Professor Jane agrees and says these little kids are sure a pain in the ass. Frey thinks that there is no need to rush, I just need to do what I can for now without making mistakes. That's the quickest way to fuck demigods. 2 weeks later, David comes into the academy with a broken leg. David was very angry, and he was shouting everywhere that he was going to kill Frey. Frey was sitting quietly in his class, and he was reading a book when Frey came to him and said, I will make you regret being born. Frey was getting annoyed by his bullshit, so he again used a magic missile and sent David flying. David was again sent back to his family to rearrange his broken nose properly. Frey thinks that he needs to get more practical experience to get used to handling mana in his body. Now we see that a lot of upperclassmen had surrounded Frey to take revenge for David's sake. But Frey simply beats the SHT out of them just using the magic missiles. The next day, we see that Frey is lying on his desk, thinking that studying here is totally useless. Suddenly Isabel comes and says you have been creating bloodbaths everywhere you go with your magic missiles. Are you aware that the other trainees are calling you the death missile? Frey thinks that this is such an embarrassing name for the mage who was once the strongest mage in the world. Frey acts very childishly and says, what should I do? There is no opportunity for me to use spells stronger than magic missiles. But here Isabel was getting seduced by the good looks of Frey Blake. Frey now asks Isabel what she wants, and Isabel says that she followed his advice and mixed the troll blood to make a potion, which increased its power many times. Frey says to try using a hybrid troll's blood. It should work better as the special strength of trolls is adequately diluted within their blood. Isabel now asks Frey what would he teach her this time. Frey thinks that Isabel is a talented kid, and if he raises her properly, he could make her a 7-star mage or probably an 8-star mage. Frey tells Isabel that he is going to teach her about battling this time. Frey says I will leave the train during the vacation. If you come with me, you will see the battle with your own eyes. Frey warns that it's going to be a harsh journey where there is even a possibility of losing life, but Isabel quickly says that I am going to accompany you, so please take me with you. Now, at the time of leaving, we see Isabel has packed her whole room in her multiple bags, including her teddy bear too. Frey complains that they are not going camping, but Isabel says women have a lot of things they need, and you wouldn't understand. Isabel now shyly asks, where are we headed for? We are headed to put you in the grave, you idiot girl. Frey says that he was thinking of going to Ospania Mountain. Isabel says, isn't that the mountain range that is so dangerous that it's called a paradise for monsters? Frey asks her if she knows how to get there, and Isabel says it appears that you always manage to astonish me. Now they take out the map and check the direction. Guy, wait a second. Just look at this Isabel bitch. How is she drooling over Frey? She deliberately spoiled the date between Frey and Professor Mary Jane. But don't worry, we all believe in MILF supremacy. Isabel tells them that they have to take a ship to reach the city and then take a warp stone from there to reach their final destination. Frey asks what a warp stone is, and Isabel tells him that, just as its name dictates, it's a warping device for long-distance movements. Frey says this is pretty convenient. There wasn't anything like that 4,000 years ago. Frey thinks that while magecraft didn't develop at all, the technology has been steadily improving, so it was a very sexy idea to commercialize the warp stones. However, Isabel says that it's a fucking expensive item, and it would roughly cost 10 gold coins for each person. Frey checks his wallet and realizes that his entire fortune is only 1 gold. Frey suddenly remembers that Isabel is also a noble, which means she must have a lot of money. Frey has now started acting all lovely towards Isabel and asking, "How much money do you have?" Isabel says that she doesn't have any money on her. Frey orders her to quickly go back home and bring back some money, and Isabel replies that we can't do that because earning money for our travel expenses is also part of the training. Frey loses his cool and says, "Are you seriously saying this with that enormous bag on you?" Isabel says this and that are different things women need. Felix and Isabel go to the ship port, and Felix is shocked to see such a magnificent boat. Frey asks, "Is this free?" And Isabel says it's free of charge for academy trainees. Frey joins the waiting line, wondering about all the meat he is going to eat after going inside the ship. But the officer stops Fred and Isabel and says the ship is full, and the next departure will be in 4 days. The officer shows them the other ship that was available, and it was a very normal-looking ship called Corteso. The ship was fairly good, but in comparison to the huge ship beside it, the Corteso looked like a boat. The captain of the ship greets everyone, and Isabel asks why there are not many passengers inside this ship. The captain tells us that this ship passes by the Oskal archipelago, where pirates sometimes appear. But the captain says that there is no need to worry because there are 2 warships escorting us, and there is a 4-star magician aboard each ship. And of course they are the battle mages from the magic tower. But suddenly, a huge pirate ship appears in front of their ship, and the pirate ship contains a lot of ominous energy. We see that the escorting warships have already been destroyed by the ice magic. You might be shocked at how some mere pirates were able to sink 2 warships in an instant. A few minutes ago, the pirates were spying on the warship, and we see that they had brought a special guest with them today, and he is the Lick Lord, Dullard. The Lick uses his magic and creates an ice spear in the sky and attacks the warships, and the magic shield deployed by the mages was totally crushed, and the ship sank. The pirate captain praises the Lick, saying that it is impressive to sink 2 warships in a single attack. But the Lick furiously says that he had definitely summoned 3 ice spears, but how is the main ship still afloat? The Lick angrily says that there is something inside that ship that is pretty strong. Now here on the ship, Frey pats Isabel and tells her to calm down, as they are just pirates. Frey says that rather than pirates, what concerns me more is that there were ice spears, but the one aiming for this ship vanished mid-air. Isabel asks, "Did you intervene?" But Frey says that it wasn't he who did this. Frey, who had sensed the mana fluctuation even before the magic started, was still unable to block it, because Frey's mind went blank the moment he sensed a presence similar to a demigod's, and memories of being confined in the abyss for 4,000 years repressed him. Frey gets a grip on himself because, although they are similar, it's not a demigod's power but an undead's mana. Isabel asks if it wasn't him who blocked the ship. Frey says, "I don't know, but we should thank him for defending this ship." Now all of the pirates have invaded the ship and started killing the crew members. The pirate king counts that there are around 40 rich trainee kids from the Westrad Academy, and now they won't have to work again in their lives. One of the trainee students angrily says, "You guys chose the wrong ship to raid because this ship is filled with excellent traders who will one day become great mages." The student started to cast his magic, but suddenly a knife came flying at his neck, which barely missed the target. The pirate says, "Do you think we are going to wait here until you finish your casting?" Frey realized that the knife was going directly for the neck, but its trajectory was slightly tilted by someone's magic. An hoodie guy comes to that trainee and says you can fight against them, so do not get yourself in trouble and stay down ordinarily. Suddenly, a huge amount of sinister mana gathers in the air and the Lick appears from it. The captain of the ship angrily says, "Did you really make a contract with the undead? The undead never make deals with us mortals, they just manipulate us and reap the profit." The pirates say we don't care about anything other than money. We see that Isabel is trembling in fear while holding hands with our friend. A Lick is at least a 5-star magician, at the very least. That's why the 4-star battle mage got annihilated in an instant. The Lick now commands him to come out in front of whoever has blocked his magic attack. The Lick warns that if you continue to hide and don't reveal yourself, I will immediately kill all of the people present here. We see that in the sky, a ton of magic icicles have been produced and are currently aiming at the ship. Suddenly, a hooded guy comes in front and says, I am the one whom you are looking for. The hooded guy takes off his hoodie and reveals that his name is Peryuan Jun. Isabel was shocked after hearing the name Peryuan Juan, and Free asked her if she knew about him. Isabel replies that there is no trainee in the academy who doesn't know of Peryuan Jun. He is the leader of the greatest club in the academy called the Traman Rings, and he is the legitimate son of one of the Empire's 3 most influential houses, the Jun House. Isabel further says that Peru's grades are also excellent, and because of that, he and she are always competing to rank first within the academy. Frey asks her if she is bragging in this type of situation. On the other side, we see that all the female trainees are sipping and swooning over Peru. Guys, I am now 100% sure that this is a fictional world because instead of boys, girls are the main protagonists here. Isabel realizes that Peryuan must be the one who nullified the Lick's magic, and she says that Peryuan might be able to defeat the Lick. But Frey breaks her false hope and says that it's not possible for him. Frey further says that it must be difficult for Peryuan to even stand straight in his current condition. The Lick is a 5-star magician, and although that Peruvian dude seems to have gained enlightenment and is expelling the impurities from his body, he has barely reached 5 stars just now. The very fact that he is still alive after canceling magic higher than his own strength is a miracle. Isabel is shocked, and she asks Frey if he is at a higher stage than the Lick over there, and Frey simply replies no. On the other side, Peryuan was thinking that he shouldn't have chosen this ship. Peru knows that he cannot face this, so he proposes to the pirate captain that he keep only him as a hostage and leave all of the other students, and in return, his family, the Jun House, can pay double the amount they are expected to gain today. The pirate says, do you think I am an idiot? We have Lord Lick with us, and we could take the amount you offer and then take money from others too to profit even more. Peru says you are right. I am not strong enough to defeat the Lick you have employed. However, I am pretty confident I could drag you guys along with me to the afterlife. Frey is really impressed after seeing his strong spirit at such a young age. But suddenly the Lick activates his magic and says, at your age, the mana tastes wonderful, so I will absorb the mana in your body to the last drop and use your body to create an undead for me to control. We see that the dark mana from the Lick had totally trapped Peryuan Jun. Now the pirate boss orders his subordinates to go and bring every single one of those trainees onto their ship. We see that the pirates are sexually assaulting the female trainees. Suddenly, their eyes fell on the extra cute girl, Isabel. Isabel tries to hide behind Frey, and the pirate mocks Frey and says, I don't think this twig can satisfy a hot girl like you. Frey looks to his right and left and then asks the pirate, is he talking about him? Frey scolds the pirate and says, you brat, watch your attitude in front of the elders. The pirate gets very angry and attacks Frey, saying that people who speak a lot always die first. But suddenly the pirate gets thrown away with a huge shockwave, and Frey says, so you do know to keep your mouth shut in front of your father. Pirate fell directly into the sea, and all of the trainees were shocked to see that their academy's eternal loser, Frey, had just killed a pirate. On the other side, Peryuan Jun was immensely shocked by what he saw. Frey kicked his opponent before the blade could reach him, causing an instant amplification of mana. It was at such an incredible speed that even Peru could barely follow. Frey gives a head pat to Isabel and says, don't flinch and watch carefully. None of them are stronger than you other than the Lick. The other pirates assumed that the fucking stupid one-eyed rascal maybe tripped over his own feet because he was too horny. Frey suddenly appeared in front of that pirate and beat the snot out of him. Frey says that you should have agreed when Peru tried to negotiate because, unlike him, I am not as gentle and kind. Frey says that he has never killed a human before, but guys like you don't look like humans to me. Frey has now started to beat the SHT out of everyone in groups by using his magic. The students were shocked to see that all of those pirates weren't even a match for our academy's eternal loser. One of the pirate bastards took a female trainee as a hostage, but Frey runs at an inhuman speed and kicks off the pirate bastard before he can do anything to the girl. Frey uses multiple magic attacks to almost annihilate all of the pirates. But suddenly, a fatty pirate now takes Isabel as a hostage and quickly points the knife at her neck. The pirate warns that if even Frey tries to move, he will slash her head off her shoulders. Frey laughs at him and asks, what can you do? And here we see that Isabel has used the lightning strike on that fat pirate. Isabel now proudly asks, how are my skills? Frey winks at her and says, I like the type of girls who act all gentle and innocent even though they are so ferocious and skilled. I would have thought about you if you were 20, 30 years older. Guys, I don't know why, but now I also like this type of girl. The Pirate King now appreciates Frey's strength and says, I am sure you are an escort dressed as a trainee. The pirate boss persuades Frey to make a deal and says, I understand that you are no ordinary man, brother, but wouldn't it be difficult for you to clean up everything here by yourself? The pirates offer that he will take exactly half of the trainees from here and leave the rest to you. Frey looks around at the crying faces of the students who are yelling that they don't want to die. The pirate asks Frey to accept this condition because it's a win-win for both of them. Frey asks, how can this be a win-win situation for you when I killed so many crew members of yours? The pirate changes the topic and says you can personally decide who you want to pick in your half. Suddenly, a girl goes running toward Frey and begs Frey to choose her because she is stronger than Pikachu. Jokes aside, the girl says that she will pay him back with 100 golds if he chooses her. She further says that if even that's not enough, she will do anything he asks. She is even willing to gift her virginity to him. The other students also started begging Frey to choose them, and they started bargaining, like someone was willing to give 200 gold or 300 gold. Frey looks at Isabelle and says, what should we do? Should we take the money after all? We don't even have travel expenses. Isabelle gets very angry over the fact that Frey is going to earn money. Frey now shouts that the highest bid is 200 golds. Who wants to bid higher? The students started to bid 300 golds, and then another student bid 400 golds. Isabelle angrily asks why he is starting an auction all of a sudden. Frey now stops his act and says, get away from me, you disgusting brats. You little brats really learned how to use money very early. But is that your own money? It's the money that your parents earned after working painstakingly. Frey further scolds and says you children training to become mages are just trying to save your own skins. Is that how a mage acts? Frey now gives a lecture that says, listen, a mage is a hero that protects the weak. No matter how life-threatening a situation becomes, a mage always saves others before himself. Now we see that Isabelle again started sighing for Frey after hearing those words. But Frey now asks, how much are you willing to pay again? Isabelle gets pretty angry and shouts at Frey, are you fucking bipolar? The Pirate King looks at the lick and thinks that he is as silent as the dead. Could it be that this bonehead can't win against that guy either? Suddenly the dickless skeleton says, don't think such nonsense. There is no human I cannot win against. The pirate was shocked because he just realized that this dickless skeleton can read his mind. And he thought, why isn't that dickless bastard not answering me? So now the dickless skeleton replies that he was simply observing for a while. Dickless bastard further says that Frey's mana shines in a glow that he has never seen before. The lick bastard was a perverted guy because he went into full nude mode. The lick arrogantly tells Frey that I have killed countless magic warriors like you, so give up and become mine. Frey nonchalantly says how delightful you talk, just like a demigod as well. The lick now creates living missiles using his own body parts and dark mana, and sends them to attack Frey. Frey quickly dodges them. Isabelle shouts at Frey and warns him to be careful as the missile has a tracking spell, so it will keep following the target. Frey now again dodges the missile that had attacked him from behind, as he already knew this was going to happen. The current situation is very dangerous because tracking magic isn't controlled by Dullard but moves itself as it aims for the target, so Dullard can now cast additional magic. The Dullard uses another magic called Bone Hand, and both the Long Hand and the living missiles simultaneously attack Frey from all sides, and a huge blast happens. After the smoke clears out, we see that the ship has been wrecked, but Frey is nowhere to be seen. Peryuin thinks that Frey has lost the fight and may have died in the last attack. But suddenly the living missiles aim themselves towards their own master, the nude lick. The lick quickly creates a shield to protect himself. Due to losing focus from the sudden attack, the binding spell applied to Peru also broke off. The lick uses his full strength to destroy the living missiles, but he wonders how these happened. The living missiles should have been targeting the greyhead magic warrior, and once the target dies, it should extinguish itself, so why was I targeted instead? Now we see that Chad Frey is standing right behind the lick and enjoying the view from his nude ass. Both Peryuin and Isabelle were also shocked to see Frey alive and standing behind the lick, saying, you look prettier from behind because I don't have to see your ugly face from here. The lick tries to attack Frey while thinking that he dodged all those attacks that came from every direction and instantly blinked behind me. And he did all that on an unstable deck. The lick thinks that even he is incapable of doing such a feat. It's not something a mere human can do. Isabelle asks Frey if he is alright, and when Frey looks towards him and gives a smile, Isabelle suddenly gets a glimpse of Lucas Trauman from Frey. Peru suddenly shouts and says, "Stop flirting and look at the sky, you horny humans." In the sky, we see that the lick is sitting in a position where it looks like he is trying to spit from the sky. But the problem is that he is going to drop these huge ice spears instead of turds. The lick launches all the ice spears on the ship, regretting not being able to absorb mana from Peru. But we see that a huge layer of shield had protected the ship from all of the attacks. It was Frey who created the shields with only one hand. Peru was utterly shocked and said this was unbelievable. Even I vomited blood from blocking a single spear, so how is Frey blocking all of the attacks? The lick now creates a massive ice spear using all of his mana and throws it at the ship. Frey jumps and breaks the whole ice spear in One Punch Man style by going through inside the spear with his whole body. Frey now stands in front of the lick, and the lick says it's impossible that a mere chick like you can rival me. Frey answers that it's because I know the path. The lick shockingly asks, "Are you telling me that you can see the pathway beyond 5 stars? Frey candidly says common sense fights a little harder. I was excited to be able to use spells stronger than magic missiles for the first time in a while. The lick asks Freed to reveal his real identity because there is no way a mere teenage boy can have such powers. Frey says my real name is Lucas Trauman, who returned after 4,000 years to educate crazy lads like you. I am history's strongest mage. Down on the ship, Peruin and Isabel were trying to hear their coverage but were unable to do so because of the distance. The lick shouts that this is nonsense. Lucas Trauman is already dead. Frey again teleports behind him and says, "Yes, indeed, you look prettier from behind." Frey makes a hole through his chest using his hand and takes out a glowing heart. The heart was Lick's life vessel, and as long as this stays intact, Lick won't die. Frey destroys the life vessels, and the Lick turns into dust. The Peruin surprisingly says Frey actually defeated the Lick that easily. The Pirate King fearfully asks, why did the Lick die? Isn't he supposed to be an undying being? Frey suddenly appears behind the pirate boss and says there is nothing more to talk about as negotiations are already broken. Frey cold-heartedly tells the pirate that every one of you is going to die here. Now we see that the pirate has been totally fucked up, and his arm is also missing. The next day, in the morning, the ship reaches its destination. After departing from the ship, Peruin approaches Frey and Isabel, and admires the power of Frey Blake. But Frey Blake simply ignores him and moves on. Even after this rude behavior, Peruin bows his head and tells Frey that he will never forget the favor of saving his life. Frey realizes that this guy is a good person, so he stops his tsundere acting and asks Peruin how he feels, saying your organ must be in chaos after blocking the Lick's magic. Peruin asks Frey what exactly happened to you. You easily defeated a Lick that even court magicians would have a hard time with. Peru further states that you are known as the weakest trainee at the academy. Were you hiding your skills this whole time? Frey simply dismisses his worries and says all sorts of things happen as you live. Peruin now invites Frey to come and visit the Jun house because he wants to show his gratitude properly. Isabel gets pretty excited after hearing that they were personally invited to the prominent Jun house. But Frey denies it and says I will see if I have time. Frey suddenly asks Peru to lend him some money, maybe about 20 golds. Peruin asks, I don't mind giving you the money, but why do you need money? Frey says that he wants to use the warp stone, but it's too expensive. Peruin takes out the money from his bag and says since it's to show my gratitude, there's no need to pay me back. Both Frey and Isabel are getting blinded by the shining light of wealth coming out of Peru and his money. We see that Peru had given them 300 gold coins, which, if we adjust according to inflation, would be worth $1 million in today's time. Frey says he doesn't need this much, only 20 gold would suffice, but Peru denies taking it back and says I have no change, so just take it all. Peruin tells Frey that he does want to invite him right away, but he is currently in the middle of marriage talks with his fiancée. The lustful demon inside Frey awakens, and he asks Peruin if her fiancée has an older sister. Peruin hastily says that his fiancée is from a different place called Luinoble Kingdom. But the thirsty Frey says, who cares? And I am fine with her aunt as well. Peruin further tells us that she is the daughter of the Aquareed house. It's an impressive household that has birthed countless skilled knights. Peruin says I am certain that they will be disappointed to learn that the fiancé is a feeble magician like me. Isabel winks at him and says, is that what the Academy's top trainee should be saying? You are not weak. Frey cheers up Peru and says don't lose confidence. You already have that handsome face of yours to help. Also, don't forget to contact me if she has an older sister or aunt. This time Isabel grabs Frey by the collar and says, you are so horny. Is your mind only filled with obscene thoughts? Peryuin now bids farewell and again asks Frey to come to his house because he doesn't want to live as a jerk who doesn't even show his gratitude to his life savior. On their way back, Frey says Peryuin is such a nice guy, like what nobles should be like, and he also has such deep pockets. Now we see Isabelle trying on some vulgar outfits, and she asks Frey how she looks in these outfits. She scolds her and says, "Are you going to train the mountains with fluttery clothes like that? Choose light clothes that don't start stinking too quickly and can easily be worn." The shopkeeper tells Frey that maybe his companion isn't quite used to the minimalist's lifestyle, and Frey starts to reflect on his judgment and thinks that maybe he shouldn't have brought her. Now we see that both of them have changed their attire, and they kind of look like mercenaries. Frey was also impressed by a say bag with subspace magic, which can store objects 10 times their own size. Frey looks around and thinks the technology has advanced, and the population has definitely increased as well. However, these advances weren't outside Frey's imagination. You can even say that things have barely changed since 4,000 years ago. Frey suspects that the demigod willingly deterred humanity's development. Isabelle looks at Frey's face and asks, "What are you thinking so seriously?" We have arrived at the warp stone. Frey was pretty surprised by the arrangements made for the mass teleportations. Frey taunts Isabelle and says those who aren't used to teleportation can feel nauseous afterwards. The machine starts, and the process of mass teleportation begins. After a moment, we see that Frey has arrived at the Aspania. Frey looks around and thinks that some places haven't changed at all in 4,000 years. Frey now looks toward Isabelle and asks, "Should we go towards our destination?" But we see that Isabelle is currently busy painting the wall in rainbow colors. Frey now enters a bar and asks for some bread, meat, and beer, which makes Isabelle blush, and she starts yelling at him. Frey tells him to be quiet and says, "Do you know how long it's been since I had some?" And he wonders why they don't sell any beer at the academy. Isabelle says minors aren't allowed to drink alcohol, so why would they sell it? Now we see that the bar owner who is preparing the food hears Frey saying, "Don't worry. Back in my days, everyone above the age of 13 drank regardless of the law." The owner of the bar serves them the food and says that seeing as you are planning to enter the Aspania Mountains, you must be newcomers. The bar owner taunts that wearing undamaged armor and attaching a new sword to the waist makes you feel like you could hunt a dragon. The bar owner orders them to finish eating and return because newbies shouldn't challenge the Aspania Mountain. Isabelle says, "I have heard that it's a paradise for monsters, and we are aware that it is a dangerous place." The bar owner angrily shouts at them and says, "You know nothing, just like Jon Snow." The other adult mercenaries also start to talk about them, saying they are those bastards trying to go to the Aspania Mountains. Maybe they have 9 spare lives or something. The bar owner now says, "I had a son just about your age. He always ran around saying he would become a mercenary. That's why when I saw the two of you, it felt like I should intervene." The dumb bitch Isabelle asks where he is now and gets the reply that he died after entering the Aspania Mountains. The bar owner further says that his son was escorting a mother and daughter who went to gather medicinal herbs. The daughter alone returned alive and told him about his son's demise. Frey asks, "Can you tell us more about the monsters that appear in the mountain range?" After hearing this question, the bar owner scratches his head and says, "Fuck, I won't be able to sleep well tonight." Now the bar owner takes out the map and gives all of the details about the Aspania Mountain that he knows of. Frey thanks him and asks how much the cost of food and beer was. The bar owner says there is no need for that. I will put it on your tab, so come back alive to pay me back. Frey asks, "Does your business even work properly like this?" Frey thanks you for the food and says the special sausages were really amazing. But the bar owner says, "Don't lie, this place is known for its trash food except for the beer." The bar owner bids them farewell and says, "I will prepare tastier sausages for the next time you come." Now we see Frey and Isabelle fighting against some tree-like monster bastards. After killing all of these monsters, Isabelle says we have just barely entered, and strong monsters are pouring out already. Isabelle says, "Now that I understand why you brought me here, I would learn a lot just by training here for a month." Frey says that's not the reason to come here. Why would I come all the way here just for that? Isabelle asks her, "Then why?" Frey says, "We are going to Dumbledore's dungeon." Isabelle shockingly asks, "Are you talking about the dungeon created by the great sage Dumbledore?" It's a dungeon rumored to give you the strength to rule the world once you find it. But currently it's only a legend since people aren't sure if it truly exists. Frey says that because of Dumbledore's personality, the dungeon probably isn't a cave or something. These words baffle Isabelle because how could Frey know a person's personality who lived 4,000 years before him? Frey remembers the words that he heard in his past life from Dumbledore. The mountains that pierce through the clouds at their peak have a beautiful lake, and on that lake is a little island. I will be waiting for you over there. Frey now tells Isabel that it's not an exaggeration to call it a legend because it's an extremely dangerous place, because you should at least be a 6-star mage to challenge it. Frey says I will rush to the 6-star stage in 1 month. Isabel doubtfully asks, are you sane? No matter how hard you train, it takes dozens of years to reach 6 stars. Frey ignores her blabbering and says we should find a proper place to train. Frey also tells Isabel that she should also stay alert and search for a safe place where she can easily concentrate. Now Frey goes to a waterfall and says, I have found our new training place. We see that there is a cave hidden behind the waterfall. Frey uses his lightning magic to light up the place and says, this is where we will be training for the next month. Frey tells Isabel that from today on, I will show you Cassigen's battling training method that you wanted to know so badly. Isabel gets very excited after hearing this, but Frey warns him and says that the reason I didn't tell you earlier is because this is a dangerous technique. Frey further says that if you copy it incorrectly, you could even lose your life. That's why you should just observe. Frey now gets into the meditating position, and he suddenly starts to levitate. We also see that all the mana from the surrounding atmosphere is quickly getting attracted towards the cave where Frey is residing. Frey collected all of the mana in his abdomen. After a few hours of gathering mana in his abdomen, Frey opens his eyes and says the preparations are finally finished. On the other side, we see that Isabel has created a lot of belly fat. I mean, she also had a ball of mana in her abdomen. Frey had predicted that Isabel was talented, but he hadn't anticipated that she would be this talented. When Isabel opened her eyes, she was shocked to see Frey too close to him with a weird, smiley face. Frey compliments her on doing so well and says, let's go and eat now. Frey now opens his sexy magical bag and takes out the food. When he offers food to Isabel, she denies it and says she is not feeling hungry. Frey says your brain is misinterpreting the feeling of mana replenishment as satiety, so eat it even if you have to force it down. While eating the food, Isabel commented that she had never imagined that she would spend time like this with Frey. Isabel further says, I have always been observing you and your extraordinary willpower. You were only a student being bullied, but my eyes were drawn to you. I'm not sure how to call it, but when I see you these days, you feel like a different person. Frey asks Isabel, which one do you think is the real me? Isabel laughs like hee and says, aren't both versions obviously the same? She further says that humans don't change, they only grow. Either way, I need to thank you for your change. Previously, you wouldn't have brought me along to train just the two of us. Isabel started to blush when she realized that she had to spend an entire month in this narrow cave with your hot and handsome protagonist. Frey understands what she is thinking and says, don't worry about useless things. Didn't I tell you I wasn't interested in kids? Frey sets up a magic barrier at the entrance and says it will be a pain in the ass if monsters come while we sleep. Frey lies down and says it's the first day, so you should also get plenty of sleep. The next day, when they woke up, Frey told Isabel to think of that as her last break. Today, we start the real training. Frey says, now we begin Cassigen's training method of battling. Frey warns Isabel that this is a very dangerous training method, so don't imitate and just watch. Frey focuses his power on the mana he has gathered in his abdomen. He separates the mana gathered in his body into fire and water attributes. Isabel sees that the contradicting manas are fighting and keeping each other in check, almost as if within the microcosm called the body. A war is being fought. It's like stabilizing a balance that won't stay aligned. This is the method of battling that Frey showed Isabel. Now, despite Frey's warning, our dumb bitch Isabel tries to imitate the battling method. But she quickly loses control over her fire and water elements, and she feels an immense amount of pain. She also coughs up blood because of this. She was astounded to think that Frey was training with such a nonsensical method, as if he were simply having a peaceful meditation. We see that Isabel is now bathing in the lake, and then she cleans and dries her body in the sun. After wearing some clothes, we see that Isabel was putting stones on the floor to count how many days had passed while practicing in these caves. 2 weeks have already passed, and Frey hasn't moved an inch during the entire time. After washing up, Isabel comes back inside the cave. She notices that the mana has started materializing around Frey, which is proof that one is about to become a 6-star. And Isabel is shocked because Frey was able to reach the 6-star stage in a mere 2 weeks. Isabel also sits beside her and starts to gather mana using the battling method. 3 weeks had passed, and because mana materialized around Frey, Isabel was also able to absorb mana at a rapid rate. Isabel's balance suddenly breaks because of a slight lack of concentration. Isabel is now overflowing with mana and thinks this is a very extreme training method. She wonders if our ancestors all practiced this ferocious method, which explains why current mages are incapable of reaching the heights of the past mages. Due to training non-stop for a week, she was smelling pretty bad. Isabel notices that the barrier is breaking because of an intruder. The intruder is none other than a very big and strong phoenix. Frey wakes up from all of this commotion and says a phoenix came to visit me. Isabel was shocked to hear it and said, "Isn't that a legendary creature and a divine beast?" Isabel knew that the Hispania mountain housed all kinds of monsters, but to think it also had a divine beast. Frey says it was attracted by the fire attribute, mana, from the battling training method. Isabel warns him and says, "Don't go near it. Divine beasts cannot be tamed by humans." Frey looks at him and asks, "Are you simply going to stare? Didn't you come here to ask for help?" The phoenix puts his head down on Frey's hands like a very obedient bird. Isabel surprisingly asks Frey, "How are you able to touch its flame feather without getting burned?" Frey says it's because it shows no hostility toward me. Frey points towards the beast's body and says, "Don't blind yourself by the fact that it's a divine beast. Watch carefully, it has a deep wound made by a large claw. It almost had its heart gouged out. It's a miracle it's still alive." Isabel asks, "Do phoenixes actually die even though they are phoenixes?" Frey says they are just less restrained by death compared to other creatures, but that doesn't mean they are immortal. Isabel wonders what it is that could inflict such a wound on the divine beast. Frey pats his head and says, "Looks like you have been in a tough fight. I can help you." Frey starts to pour his fire attribute mana, which he gathered through the battling method. Frey tells the phoenix that you are taking away the fruits of my training. The birds made a sad noise, which felt like he was trying to apologize. But Frey says, "Don't worry, I am just joking. Stay still. It's almost over." Isabel was surprised to see that even Frey can have such expressions and emotions. Isabel thinks that the surrounding air has also become peaceful. Inside the memory of Frey, we see that Lucas Trauman is talking with the phoenix and asking it if it's scared to do a race because of the rain. Lucas taunts that the great phoenix wouldn't be weakened by such a light drizzle, right? Now, back to the present, Frey looks at the phoenix and says how nostalgic it is that my old friend also behaved like you. We see that the injuries of the phoenix have started to heal, and Isabel wonders if a phoenix regains its healing power by recovering its energy. The phoenix had regained his health, and Frey told her to choose her opponents wisely. After the phoenix flew away, Frey noticed something on the ground. It was a phoenix's feather. You can use it to heal injuries or produce magic items. It can fetch a very high price. Frey says this phoenix is someone who repays his debt, unlike someone who is not of help, even though I have been sheltering her for days and weeks. The dumb bitch Isabel asks, "Are you talking about me?" and says, "Can't you talk nicely to humans as well? Just like you did with the phoenix." Frey takes off his clothes and again starts to gather mana, and we see that due to not eating, he would turn into an undead because there would be nothing left except bone. Isabel looks at Frey and thinks that he is truly an outstanding person. With his vast historical knowledge and his speech that shows a certain level of maturity and experience, it's almost as if he is an elderly sage. The depth he shows is like a flawless great mage's. Isabel again gets a glimpse of the great mage Lucas Trauman from our skinny Frey. She thinks that this is happening because she might have some deep feelings for Frey. After a week, Frey again wakes up, but this time he has become a 6-star mage. Isabel thinks that this is an unbelievable scene. The youngest person in the world to reach the 6-star stage was only 35. If people learn that a trainee of the academy reached the 6-star stage, the world will be in an uproar. Frey takes a deep breath and thinks that now he can gather mana just by breathing. Suddenly, Fred loses his balance and starts to fall, but Isabel saves him, and Fred says that his body is in a mess just because he started it for a few weeks. Isabel asks if he wants some beef jerky, but Frey says no, let's go hunt. I need to get some oily food into my stomach. When Frey and Isabel came outside, they were surprised to see all of the monsters' dead bodies lying outside their cave entrance. Frey says this must be the work of a phoenix rascal. No wonder I didn't sense any monsters while I was meditating. Frey remembers what he said to the phoenix about taking away the fruits of his training and thinks that the phoenix shouldn't have taken those words to heart. Frey tells Isabel that there is no need to hunt, so let's go to the Dumbledore's dungeon after eating. Suddenly they heard the screaming of a human, which felt like it wasn't far from there. Frey thinks that even if he is starving, he has to go and help. He flies out into the sky, leaving Isabel behind. On the other side, we see that the source of the voice was a young man who was badly beaten up and tied to a tree. And there are a bunch of thugs lying around and playing with his life. The boss of the hunters says, "Just when will that woman pass by here?" It's already been over a month. When must we stay closed up in these irritating mountains? One of the thugs takes the knife and says, "Watch carefully, you ugly fuckers. I will properly stab him in the forehead." The knife was exactly aimed at the head of the poor man, but suddenly the knife got deflected by an air current. Thug number 1 taunts thug number 2, saying that even the wind doesn't want to help you. Thug number suddenly got surprised by the presence of Frey standing there and asked him, "Who are you?" The thugs took out their weapons, but when they looked at Frey's face, they wondered, isn't this dude about to die? Or is he already dead? Frey looks around and says, "Using living humans as targets to play darts looks like you are enjoying yourselves, you assholes." Thug number 1 looks at Frey in amazement and says, "Wow, this corpse can talk." The next moment, the head of that thug went flying in the air. We see that the head was cut off by a huge Grim Reaper scythe, which was summoned out of nowhere in the sky. The boss of thugs realizes that this is a 5-star magic called the Light Scythe. Frey opens his mouth and says, "Hello friends, it's time for a lesson." After a while, we see that Frey has annihilated all of the bandits quite quickly. Isabel reaches out to him and asks if he killed all of them, but Frey says he let one of them escape with tracking magic on him. Frey points at a dead corpse and says the other bandits were calling him the vice captain, so there must be a captain somewhere. Isabel asks if he is planning on annihilating them too, and Frey replies that he can't act as if nothing happened when these guys killed innocent people. Frey remembers how the demigod enjoyed watching Huma hate and kill each other. No matter how insignificant it is, it sickens me to imagine demigods being happy about something. The man who was tied to the tree as a dart practice asks Frey if they saved him. Frey tells him that, unfortunately, he has lost too much blood and that he is under no obligation to save him. The man started to cry and said he didn't want to die and wanted to apologize to his father before dying. Frey stops as he remembers something after hearing those words. On the other side, the escaped bandit informs the captain about how all of them were killed by ghosts. The captain says, "What bullshit are you spouting? Did you drink an entire barrel?" But the bandit was firm in his words. He describes it and says his whitened hair was scattering in the wind, and the skinny body was stinking rotten. He is no ordinary man, and his mastery of fighting in the mountains didn't allow us to fight back at all. He sent the heads of their members flying in an instant, and I alone barely escaped with life. The captain concludes that this unknown entity must be a magician, and his advisor also agrees with him. The advisor further says that, looking at the circumstances, he seems capable of double casting, which concludes that he is a battle mage. The captain gives orders to increase the lookouts and says to inform everyone the moment you find the mage. After getting into position, kill him. The advisor asks if the Aquareed house hired magicians, but the captain denies it and says that the Proud Knight family would never use magicians as bodyguards. The captain points at the escaped bandit and says, "Sacy, you guys were playing human darts, so who are you suing to play?" The bandit says that he was just some random mercenary who was escorting the mother and child, who had come to pick herbs. The captain thinks that the mercenary doesn't seem capable of hiring a battle mage, so just who is this mage? Sometimes later, we see a broken down cart and many soldiers who were killed. It was revealed that the culprit behind this was the bandit captain. The victim is the eldest daughter of the Aquareed Knight house, named Sonya Aquareed. The bandits have been waiting here to ambush them. Sonya still fights the bandits even though she is on the verge of collapse, but she wasn't able to win against the advisor of Captain Bandit. The captain says he is about to fall in love with the beauty of Sonya Aquareed and how she holds her sword. The captain makes a very perverted look and says it was worth waiting for more than a month in these infuriating mountains. "You are as beautiful as the rumors depict, Sonya Aquareed." On the other hand, Sonya was thinking about her situation as all of the escorting knights were annihilated. Only the maids and Sir Luther remain, but Sir Luther has long since retired, so the only person capable of fighting is Sonya herself. On the other hand, there are more than 20 skilled bandits on the opposite side. The bandit captain asks Sonya where their escort magician is, but Sonya Aquareed gets angry and says, "What kind of bullshit is this? Do you believe that a knight with a long history would use a lowly magician as an escort? Magicians these days are all weaklings." The captain realizes that the guy who interfered with his underlings wasn't affiliated with them. The captain tells Sonya that they are not going to kill her right away. Sonya asks, "What does he mean by that?" The captain says it is really necessary to spell it out in this situation. The bandits were weeping, thinking that they were going to play with a noble household woman, which they could never dream of. Sonya says, "I would rather bite my tongue right now instead of becoming your plaything." The captain says, "If you die, we will help ourselves to those women behind you. We have been living like beggars for over a month just to get you, so my boys are quite hungry now." The nuns ask Sonya to take their lives so they can die as pure virgins instead of getting violated by these savages. Sonya then determines herself and moves her sword to kill 2 young maidens. But she realizes that the sword in her hands has gone missing. She thinks that it was the bandits who took away her swords with their skills. Then she orders the maids to bite their own tongues. The bandit captain interrupts and says, "You have finally revealed yourself." We see that Frey is standing beside Sonya while holding her sword, and even Sonya is shocked to see her. The bandit captain says he has heard about you. "It looks like you have been taking good care of my boys." Frey asks him if he is the leader. The bandit leader now gets seriously angry and asks, what did Frey do to his men? Frey replies that he took very good care of them. The bandit captain furiously orders his minions to kill Frey immediately. The captain assumes that Frey is a battle mage, and they can easily win against him with their numbers. But Frey uses a wind cutter and cuts the bodies of bandits. Gleichzeitig, he also attacks the bandit captain with magic missiles. Sonya was shocked to see such powers and asked Isabelle about who they were and what their purpose was. Isabelle smiles and replies, "You may rest easy now that we are not your enemies." On the other side, the bandit captain was able to defend himself and thinks that since Frey is just a magician, he can keep attacking like this for a long time since there is a certain cycle with magic spells. The bandit captain had assumed that he was the sole target of Frey, as he was constantly bombarding him with magic spells. But surprisingly, his minions are getting killed one by one with Frey's attack. The bandit captain was shocked to see that Frey was casting so many spells at the same time. The captain bandit is shocked because he has never seen a mage like that. He then gets hit by a magic missile. Frey then stops attacking, and the bandit captain misunderstands that he is out of mana. He orders all of his minions to attack him now. Sonya worriedly asks Frey if he really ran out of mana, and she wants to help if that is true. Frey activates a magic circle and warns Sonya to get back because it can be dangerous. The magic that Frey used just now was an earthquake spell. All of the bandits get caught up in the earthquake and die by getting buried under the ground. Sonya thinks that earthquakes are 5-star magic spells. How did Frey cast it while facing those mercenaries? Isabelle says that the previous attacks were distractions to buy some time for this spell. Sonya gets shocked and asks if the sight of light arrows was only a diversion. "I have never seen or heard of such skills in double casting." Isabelle says that she had also never seen or heard of it until she met Frey. As the fight is over, Sonya shows her gratitude to Frey and introduces herself as Sonya Aquarite of the Luinoble Kingdom. Frey also says his name without showing any courtesy, and he wonders if he heard it before. Sonya had to close her nose because of the bad smell coming towards her. As both Frey and Isabelle start to bicker again, and Sonya thinks that Frey doesn't look like a beggar. Is he a barbarian hermit who secluded himself in the mountains? The knight tells Sonya that he is a child of Blake House. Sonya asks for further information, and the knight tells her that Blake House is one of the houses with a highly noble lineage that maintains the empire. The current family head, Surasaka Blake, is one of the Empire's 8 7-star magicians as well as the master of the 6th magic tower. Sonya wonders how such a noble person's appearance can be so haggard. Frey asks Sonya and his knight, where are they headed to? The knight tells us that we will head to the city. "I have heard that there is a city called Uspaniola near this area." Frey tells them that he is also headed there, so he will guide them. The knight looks around and says, "Thank you for the proposal, but we will have to gather the bodies of our escort knights first. It seems like it will take a while, so please take your leave first." Frey asks, "Will you bury them here?" And the knight says they have no other choice as they cannot transport them all to the city. Frey tells them that he will take them to the city for him. He then uses his magic and makes all the dead bodies and the broken carriage float. Frey puts the carriage into a wheel cart, and then he puts all of the dead soldiers in the cart. While they were walking towards their destination, Sonya was shocked when she realized that Frey was only 20 years old. She was expecting Frey to be at least a 30-year-old man. Frey says, "Who cares about my age, whether it's 20 or 30? He then changes the topic toward those bandit mercenaries and says it seemed like they were waiting for you in the mountains from the start. Do you know why? Sonya says that, "Now that I think about it, they did say something about waiting for us for over a month." The knight says if it's a month, it's about the same period as when we left Luinoble. He further says, "I can't think of the culprit, but the Aquarite has as many enemies as allies." So it says those mercenaries were very skilled. Since they managed to dispatch such skilled mercenaries, they must be people with great power. She smiles and says that even though Frey deals with them so easily, she now asks Frey, "How did you gain sucking skills and power? I always thought that magicians were all weak and feeble." That mindset was completely erased today. Frey says that the answer is very simple. You have to put in a lot of effort. Now we see that they have arrived at a seaport. They sent the dead bodies and one maid back to their kingdom. Frey now bids goodbye to Sonya, but Sonya tries to stop Frey from going, and then she shyly says that she will return this favor. Frey says that there is no need for that, as we need to help each other live and survive. The knight also bows his head and says, please allow us to return the favor. If we just send you off like this, the armored house will lose face. Frey thinks about it for a while and says, buy me a dinner. I know of a place that sells extremely delicious sausages. After a while, they reach the previous inn, and Sonya comments that this doesn't look like a place nobles would frequent. Frey tells them that it's a well-known fact that dirty and run-down places like this make the best meals. Someone says, what did you just call a dirty and run-down place? It was the same old pub owner who said this. He winks at Frey and says, I am glad to see you back. Frey then points towards someone and says there is one more person who has returned alive. The old man drops all of the food on his hand due to excitement. He shakingly asks, are you my son, Kazan? Now we see that they are inside the room, and the old man is tending to the wounds of his son, and Frey tells him that they have done the emergency treatment and he will be fine. Isabel now asks Frey how he knows that he was the old man's son, and Frey tells her that both of them look the same, especially around their eyes. Frey tells Isabel that she has used a pretty good healing spell, and he says it looks like the drag of our team has some unexpected skills in healing magic. Isabel gets angry and says, I am just asking to be sure, but who is this drag you are talking about? But Frey nonchalantly says, I am calling you a drag. Frey now tells me that he is planning on lodging here, but it looks like the house is full. The knight affirms and says there are so many customers that this must be a good pub. Frey tries to taunt the old man and says, I apologize for bringing you all the way, Sir Luther, even though the sausages here are absolutely delectable. Suddenly, the old man started to act like crazy and told everyone to get out of the club right now. He even tells everyone that he won't charge them anything, so just get lost for now. The old man now turns towards Frey and says, what do you mean by full? This place is absolutely empty. Now we see that Sonya is taking a bath, but she is carefully thinking about something else. On the other side, Frey is doing a stunt that we normally see in gangbang videos. Later, Sonya arrives there after wearing clothes. Frey greets her and says, I've already started eating without you. We notice that Sonya's face is somewhat red as she goes toward her chair. Suddenly her leg slips, which makes her lose her balance, but Frey catches her and saves her from falling. Frey notices a huge number of scars on Sonya's hand. She quickly hides her hand, and her facial expressions become stern and sad. But Frey says that those scars look pretty cool. They are traces of your effort. Isabel, who is well aware of how much of a Riz god Frey is, changes the topic and says, we heard that you were headed for Cascow, but what's your final destination? And Sonya tells her that they are going to Jun's house. Both Frey and Isabel were surprised to know this and remembered what Peryuan told them before, that her fiancée is the daughter of the Aquareed house. Frey shouts and says you are the fiancé, and Isabel also compliments her and says she is the daughter of the Aquareed house. Meanwhile, Sonya was totally clueless as to why both of them suddenly got so hyped up. The knight asks, are you acquaintances of Lord Peryuan? Isabel tells me that Frey and Lord Peryuan are friends at the same academy, and they heard about the engagement from him. Frey says Sonya is Peru's fiancé. He sure is a lucky bastard. On the next day, they prepare to depart for their respective destinations. Isabel hopes to make the rest of their journey peaceful. Sonya shyly asks Frey if he could come to Jun's house after doing his business. Frey easily agrees, and his riz starts to leak out, which annoys Isabel. Sonya smiles and says, I will wait for you. Now we see that both Frey and Isabel are going into a forest. They then reach the Dumbledore's dungeon, which is situated on a tall mountain. The mountain was also known as Drake Mountain because a lot of drakes live there. Isabel gets scared and asks, do we have to fight against those in there? Frey says it would be very nice if that were the truth, and he points at the ground below. We see the humongous footprint of a drake. Frey says that the Drake King is a few dozen times bigger than normal ones. Isabel gets very scared and says, I have never heard of a drake this big. Frey tells Isabel to get her thoughts straight because anything could happen at this place. He suddenly activates magic and points it towards Isabel. Before she could say anything, she was thrown out due to the force of the spell. Suddenly, a huge monster attacks with a tree trunk where Isabel was standing previously. Isabel realizes that Frey attacked her to save her, and she was pretty shocked to see an ogre. This ogre had bloodshot red skin and 3 eyes, which signifies that it is a mutant. Isabel quickly uses her magic fireball and attacks the huge-ass ogre. Frey was glad to see that Isabel had grown significantly during this journey. But surprisingly, the mutant ogre came out of this attack totally unscathed. Isabel whines about her attack not being effective at all while being unaware of the fact that she has grown a lot stronger. Frey says that its skin gained a high resistance to fire magic when it evolved, probably because of the drakes. Isabel was surprised to know that the monster went into an attribute evolution. She asks what they are supposed to do then. Frey says if fire doesn't work, then you should use ice, and he summons a huge ass of ice. Isabel was shivering in the cold because, just by creating these two small ice spears, the surrounding temperature dropped as if winter had finally come. Isabel looks at Frey and says, "You really remind me of the great mage Lucas Trauman." Frey shoots the ice spear at the ogre, but the ogre strikes them back very furiously. Isabel notices that even a powerful ice spear didn't manage to completely pierce its skin. They ran away from the sight of the ogre and hid. Frey comments that not only did the monster experience attribute evolution, but its bones and skin were reinforced just like steel. Isabel says the ogre has super strength. It would be best to burn it down with fire magic, but its skin has a high fire resistance. Isabel suggests burying it alive using an earthquake like last time, but Frey denies it and says, "How can you be such a musclehead?" He says, "Are you trying to gather all the drakes here by using such a noisy, large-scale spell?" Frey says there is a special well-digging technique for situations like this. He then goes in front of the monster and summons a bunch of ice spears. Isabel shivers in the cold and says, "Why are you using those ineffective ice spears again?" Frey says you should only dig a single well to succeed. Frey shoots the ice spear directly at his forehead. He then continues to shoot at the same spot again and again, multiple times. Due to multiple attacks, the cluster of spears was finally able to pierce the skull of the ogre. Frey then points at the dead body of the ogre and says, "Did you see that, you dumbass? Is it best to just dig a single well?" But because they have created so much ruckus, they have pulled the attention of drakes toward them. One of the dragons attacks them with fire breath, but Frey deploys a barrier to protect them. Frey then flies out in the sky and attacks with a very huge spear, which instantly kills the drake monster. Suddenly, the Drake King appears at the site, which surprises both Isabel and Frey. Frey quickly holds Isabel and hides behind the tree, because it's not an opponent Frey can defeat right now. Later, we see that Frey is meditating to quickly replenish his mana, and Isabel is also using her healing magic to heal his wounds. Frey has been fighting monsters here for the last 2 weeks, and his mind is now in sync with this new body. But there is still something that he has to do. He needs to go to Dumbledore's dungeon. Both of them then depart for the dungeon using flying magic. Frey warns Isabel not to deactivate the barrier because, considering Dumbledore's personality, it wouldn't be surprising if he kept monsters in this lake. Isabel asks Frey how he knows about Dumbledore's dungeon. Frey says that it was a habit of Dumbledore to always speak about how he would live in retirement. Isabel is a little confused as to how Frey knows about the habits of Dumbledore. They then land on an island because Frey tells them that this is their destination. Isabel was surprised to see how magnificent the island was. Frey says that Dumbledore is very sneaky. The dungeon is buried beneath this land. There is a dungeon many times bigger than the island itself. Frey looks at Isabel's expression and tells her that this island is just the entrance to it. Then they went towards a huge tree where the entrance was. They noticed that inside the entrance there are also stairs made up of wood, and there are also multiple magical torches present. They go deep inside the cave, and they get obstructed by an enormous door lit up with magic. Isabel asks, "How do we open the door?" Frey answers, "It's a spell that Dumbledore concocted himself. If we try to open it by force, we will be obliterated." Frey then puts his hand on the sphere, which was the only thing present there beside the door. And suddenly a lot of speech comes out of that sphere. The smoke combined to form a little child flying in the air, and he asks, "Can you hear me?" Isabel comments, "What an odd thing it is, just who is he?" But Frey just stood there in shock. The boy says, "Welcome to my dungeon. I don't know what you measly magicians are pursuing in this place, but you are still welcome." Frey tries to touch this boy, but unfortunately, his hands pass through him, which concludes that he is just a projection. Isabel says it appears to be a welcome message recorded using mana. Frey was trembling with grief, and with tears in his eyes, he said, "Just how many years did you cheat on your appearance while recording this message? You are supposed to be a senile old man. Still, it's nice to see you again, even in this form, Albus Dumbledore." The recorded projection of young Dumbledore says, "What brings you to this place? Enlighten me, please." Because of the perfect timing of his replies, Isabel thought that they could talk to this projection. But the young boy says again, "You can try to tell me, but this is just an automatic recording, so I will just say my piece." The young boy further says that no matter what you want, you will obtain it here because this place is my dungeon. Frey asks the young boy, "How did you die?" But the young boy says his pre-programmed words, which are I obviously cannot send you inside without a little test. To enter the dungeon, you must give the correct answer to the question I am about to ask. With even a single mistake, you may not be able to escape this place for eternity, so beware. Frey looks at the projection and thinks my friend's voice and attitude are the same as back then. It's as if I have returned to times when we used to talk and laugh together. But my voice cannot reach you. I truly am the only one alive. Frey grits his hands and says, no, I am not the only one who survived. Those I loved and cared about returned to dust with the passing of time. But the ones who made us like this are still ruling this world as if nothing had happened. My enemies are still alive. The project interrupts Frey and says, it's uncool of me to drag this conversation out. Let's start with the question already. What do I, Albus Dumbledore, hate the most? Frey angrily says that the answer to this question is demigods. The young boy winks and says this is the correct answer. The projection now vanishes, and the door opens. Isabel was dumbfoundedly standing there, wondering how Frey knew so much about Dumbledore. Frey says we are in Dumbledore's dungeon. Considering his personality, it's definitely not an ordinary warehouse or anything. We don't know what kind of traps are waiting for us inside. Frey further says that if you stupidly stand still like that, you will be dead in no time. Don't you want to become stronger? Stop overthinking and focus. They then moved on to the next room to go more deeply inside the dungeon. Their path was again halted by a huge door, and Frey again put his hand on the sphere. This time, the projection that appeared from the smoke is of a young man's version of Albus Dumbledore. Isabel comments that it's a young man this time, and Frey tells her he is also Dumbledore. And he further says that it appears that he ages every time we pass through the door. I have no idea why he is doing this, though. The young man says now is the time for the second question, but he suddenly remarks that he forgot to explain something. And he says I have prepared greater and better items the deeper you head inside. However, you are permitted to take only a single item with you. If you don't follow those rules, our cult little golem friends will get quite mad. The young man warns of a single mistake, and out you go. So make sure to be careful. The young man now takes the name Iris Fistfounder and says, what an annoying woman. I can never understand the thought process of witches. Here we are struggling to save the world, and she goes head over heels for a man and doesn't care if the world ends. Frey was shocked to hear this news. Isabel says Iris Fistfounder isn't the full name of the Black with Iris. Frey thinks about the Black Witch, Iris Fistfounder, and remembers her as a woman with ebony hair and a mysterious smile on her face at all times. The title Black Witch fits her totally because no man in the world could ever resist her charm. Frey says, I think I have never seen a woman as alluring as her. Guys, my maternal senses are tingling, and I have already fallen for her charm. I hope you guys can resist it. The MILF devil also takes over the mind of Frey and makes him drool over Iris, but Dumbledore comments that Iris has her faults. But Lucas is even worse. How could he not notice Iris trying to seduce him? Isn't he supposed to be a great mage? Frey was totally shocked upon hearing the news that Iris was in love with him. Dumbledore says, how can someone be so dense when a woman is crazy for him? Isn't he supposed to be a wise magician? Isabel thinks that Frey is the same as Sir Lucas in that aspect. Dumbledore further says, I bet that even a golem isn't as dense as he is. Oh, wait, let's ask the next question. Frey was angry as fuck upon hearing these comments. Dumbledore now says, Iris has a contract with 3 powerful devils and uses them to fight. One of them holds a different weapon on each of his 6 arms and embodies coexistence. But before he can complete his question, Frey says the devil's name is Asura. The projection disappears in the smoke after hearing the correct answer. Isabel asks Frey, how did you answer the question even without listening to the end of the question? Later, we see that inside the room there are a bunch of jewelry, which are artifacts that could increase the power of the wearer. This time, the projection appears to ask the question of an old man. Frey realizes that the reason why Dumbledore's appearance ages the further they head inside is because this entire dungeon is Dumbledore's diary. After following this same process multiple times, they have already reached the 5th room. Frey says this is very odd. The questions aren't related to magecraft at all but are about bizarre subjects instead. Isabel says you are even more bizarre for answering correctly to all those questions. Frey was utterly shocked when he reached the last room. The projection appeared this time as a very old man with a long white beard. The old man says Lucas Trauman was the great mage who was hailed as the strongest at the age of 40, the Grand Master of humanity. It's my life's greatest pride and joy to be able to consider him a dear friend of mine. Frey replies in a shaky voice, you are also my dearest friend. The old man says now is the last question. What is my full name? Frey now realizes why Dumbledore kept asking such weird questions, because he was asking only those questions that only Lucas Trauman could answer. Frey says Albus Percival Dumbledore. The projection of Dumbledore starts to disintegrate into dust as he says, head inside. Everything in this room was prepared for you. Take care of everything, Lucas. Frey tries to stop him from disappearing, but his efforts are all in vain. Isabelle was utterly shocked because the great sage Dumbledore just referred to Frey as Lucas Trauman. Both of them now enter the last room, which was pretty normal. Isabelle commented that, unlike the previous ones, it's a cozy room where one could live. Frey looks inside a treasure chest, trying to find something. He takes out a very little bottle filled with sticky white liquid. Frey says that this is a frozen river. Isabelle was shocked upon hearing this and said, isn't that the Leadery solution created in the Wailing Cave, with one drop forming every 1,000 years? A miraculous elixir that can explosively expand one's magic channel, increase their inner mana, and instantly raise an ordinary human stage to 4 stars with a single drop. Frey compliments her and says she is as knowledgeable as ever. Isabelle freaks out and says, but I have heard that it was just an imaginary elixir. Are you saying that this sticky white thing is the frozen river? Frey says yes, and I absolutely need this if I want to reach the 7-star stage. Isabelle then goes and picks up some strange-looking earrings and asks, what are these? Frey says these are typhoon earrings. I made those. Isabelle asks, how can something you made be inside Dumbledore's dungeon's final room? Frey says those are earrings I made 4,000 years ago for that snacky bastard. I had nothing else to do, so I just created them and gave them to Dumbledore since he liked them for some reason. Isabelle comes closer to Frey and says, could you elaborate on what you said just now for me? Frey makes a stern face and says, I am Lucas Trauman. 4,000 years ago, Dumbledore and I rebelled against a demigod named Lord. I was imprisoned in the darkness of the abyss by a demigod and spent 4,000 years in it. But one day a voice pierced through the abyss's darkness and reached me. It was the voice of Frey Blake. I don't know how he called out to me or how our minds synchronized. Nevertheless, he spoke to me and I answered. Frey Blake gave me this body. He further says, I don't think you would believe me. Isabelle agrees and says it truly is an inconceivable story. However, there were many cases where this truth was apparent. Oddly enough, this far-fetched excuse explains everything. Isabelle bows down and says, I present my heartfelt greetings, Lord Lucas. Frey says just call me Frey as usual. It will help me succeed in my goal. Isabelle now picks up a bracelet, and this is very pretty. Frey tells me that this is the great sage staff. Dumbledore used to use it like it was a part of himself. Isabelle says this is a bracelet, not a staff. Frey takes the bracelet from her hands and says, give that to me. If you use it incorrectly, it might suck you dry of mana and kill you. Frey now equips both the bracelet and earrings, and a huge amount of mana starts to accumulate around him. Isabelle was surprised to see such a huge mana increase. Frey says it's not my style to use magic tools, but it's a friend's keepsake. Isabelle again takes out a little ball type thing and asks, what is this? Frey looks at it and wonders if it is a golem core, but it has a tremendous amount of mana inside of it. Frey orders Isabelle to pack all the things in their bag. Frey looks around and says all that is on Dumbledore's desk. Frey looks at the candle at the desk and says, a candle that burns for eternity using mana. Dumbledore always preferred creating useless stuff like this. Frey now takes a look at the notebook that was present on the table, and the first thing he sees written on the book is Lucas vanished. Frey starts to read his diary, and it is written as follows, I am certain that the demigod Lord is the culprit other than him. There is nobody who can make Lucas disappear without leaving behind a single trace. What should I do? This isn't as simple as a single 9-star magician vanishing. He was the leader who united us. The last hope of humanity has vanished. Frey realizes that Dumbledore recorded the events that happened after his disappearance. The clash between the magic warrior Cassian and the Blade King Lucid. The sudden disappearance of the Black Witch Iris. The demigod's influence was already deeply rooted within the continent, and Dumbledore was standing in the middle of it. He was left alone, and he couldn't even trust his fellow humans. Despite other people's apparent admiration and respect, their inner thoughts were filled with malice as they aimed for Dumbledore's death. Within this diary, the terrible battles he fought daily were recorded in detail. Lucas read about his friend's life as he fought alone. Frey further reads, Lucas is our leader, someone who could never be replaced. I tried to bear his burden in his stead, but as time went by, every second showed the reality of my lacking skills and the emptiness Lucas had left behind. The last words of Dumbledore were, I am sorry, Lucas, I couldn't do it. Frey was shivering in grief and said, you moron, why did you get this far on your own? Frey further says, I only realized how lonely it felt to be alone. After experiencing my current life, Frey closes Dumbledore's diary and says, I shall inherit the loneliness you felt along with your will. Watch over me. I will definitely hit the demigod straight in the face. Isabel sadly looks at the Dumbledore's diary, and she suddenly notices something. She stops Frey and says there is another page left. The contents written on that page were as follows. To the one reading this, you must complete Anastasia. I have left behind all my records in there. In my greatest masterpiece, Anastasia. Isabel looks at Frey and asks, what do you think Anastasia is? Meanwhile, Frey puts his hands in the back and takes out the golem core. We see that the name Anastasia was inscribed on that core. As they were moving out of the dungeon, Frey said Dumbledore had reached the pinnacle of golem making skill. For him to call it his greatest masterpiece, just what is this Anastasia? Isabel says if it's you, the mage Lucas Trauman, couldn't you complete the golem using this core? Frey stops at his place, and his face gets very angry. Now we go back into the past and see a weird-looking robot made by Lucas. Dumbledore was laughing uncontrollably after seeing this weird-ass golem. Dumbledore taunts him and says, don't make golems by yourself ever again. Just ask me to make them for you next time. I can make something better than this just by using my tongue. Lucas then attacks Dumbledore with a fireball to punish him, and that attack sends him flying. Frey then snaps back to reality and says if we complete this, we will get to know about the unrecorded history. Isabel asks, what is this unrecorded history you are talking about? Frey replies that everything that happened while I was locked in the abyss. Frey suddenly stops in his tracks, and Isabel asks him what's wrong this time. Frey angrily replies to Isabel as soon as we are outside. Head back to the village immediately. When they went outside, they were greeted by the Drake King bastard, who was intently waiting for him. Frey asks the monster, are you waiting for me? But the monster doesn't reply. Frey again says, ask me, I already know that you are an intelligent monster. The monster laughs and says, yes, I was waiting for you, who fearlessly stepped into this mighty Torkunda's territory. Frey says you must have noticed us back in the forest. Why didn't you attack us back then? Isabel realizes that Frey's voice is shaking, and he thinks that she has never seen him this nervous before. The monster replies, I was waiting for you to exit that place. All those who exit that place have something good in them. Frey says he finally understands how you grew to be so big. You are hunting humans by using this dungeon as a trap. The dungeon my friend treasured more than his own life, and you have been using it to fill your insignificant stomach. Frey gets even more angry and says you need a little beating. The Drake King looks into the furious eyes of Frey, and he remembers his past. Inside his memories, we see that the Black Witch Iris had defeated him and warned him to stop coming after her, otherwise she would kill her. The Drake King says to Frey, I don't like those eyes of yours. Frey tells Isabel to leave as he is not confident enough to fight against him, and Isabel says that's exactly why I shouldn't leave you alone. We see that the Dragon King is preparing his dragon breath, and he says people like you taste the best, allow me to eat you. On the other side, Frey infuses his mana inside that bracelet, which then converts into a staff. Frey then uses the earth wall magic and punches the Dragon King in the face. Frey then turns towards Isabel and angrily says, don't you understand? You are a hindrance, you leech. She also realizes that she is being a burden just like Sakura, so she quickly moves out of there and says, I will be back as fast as possible. Frey now uses his flight magic to run away from the Drake King, but the Drake King also follows him while attacking him with the dragon breaths. A bunch of minion dragons also tried to stop Frey from running away. Frey then uses both the windstorm and the ice spear simultaneously and kills all of the monsters. Frey thinks that killing these small fries won't change much. I need to deal with the big guys to end this fight. He then starts to cast an explosion magic, but he needs 3 seconds to cast the magic, so he calculates the speed and flight direction of the Dragon King and perfectly places the site of the explosion right beneath the neck of the monster. But surprisingly, the monster came out totally unscathed from the explosion. The monster says your skills are amazing, but the power isn't enough. Frey realizes that he is in a very bad situation because in front of him is the Drake King and behind him is a swarm of drakes. Frey thinks that he is in very deep trouble and wonders, do I have to drink the frozen river right now? Now we see that a few hours ago, inside the dungeon, Isabel Frey asked, why isn't he drinking the frozen river? Frey says, do you think this is merely an energizing tonic? Even I will need at least a week to control the frozen river's energy. Frey then tells me that I can't drink it here because we can't stay here for that long without food and water. Back to the present, Frey is fighting with the normal drakes and thinking that if I drink the frozen river now, it's basically suicide. Frey now gets trapped in the attack of the Drake King, but someone comes and hits the Drake King. It is revealed that the Phoenix was the one who helped Frey. Frey smiles after looking at her and says, "You are bursting with health." The Drake King annoyingly says, "Don't interfere, you little chick." The Drake King and Phoenix clashed with each other, and Frey warned the Phoenix to run away. But he soon realized that the Phoenix had come here even after knowing that she couldn't win against this opponent. Frey says, "Are you trying to buy me time? Are you telling Lucas Trauman to escape?" Frey realizes that his current self is truly weak because of his weak resolve. Frey then moves away from the battle site and goes inside the nearest cave. Frey then takes out the bottle of frozen river and thinks that he can't fear death because it's an everyday occurrence. He then proceeds to drink the sticky white liquid inside the bottle. Suddenly, he feels a lot of pain, and blood starts to come out of his eyes. Frey feels a hell of a lot of pain while trying to absorb the frozen river. On the other side, where the Drake King and Phoenix are fighting, the Drake King says, "No wonder you looked familiar. You are the divine beast that escaped my grasp some time ago." The Drake King further says, "Today is a very good day. The human who ran away was also good prey, but your tenacious life energy will fill my stomach so much more." Inside the memories of Phoenix, we see that he has been gravely injured by the Dragon King, and the Dragon King was planning to eat her. But the Phoenix gathered all of her strength and created a huge explosion, which hindered the sight of the Drake King. She takes this chance and runs away. The Phoenix somehow reaches the waterfall where Frey was training using the battling method. After that, we already know how Frey uses his newly gathered fire-type mana to heal Phoenix. Back to the present, the Phoenix is doing her best to fight the Dragon King to repay Frey's kindness. But as we already know, she is no match for the Drake King, and she gets pretty much beaten up. On the other side of the cave, the ice energy from the frozen river is going rampant inside and outside Frey's body. Frey knew that the burden would be heavy, but he never expected that this would be this difficult. Frey apologizes to everyone for wasting his second life all because of his pride and confidence. Frey says, "I don't have the energy to absorb the elixir's power." As Frey was about to lose consciousness, he suddenly started to gain energy, and he wondered what was happening. He opened his eyes and saw Isabelle, and he asked her, "Why are you here?" But Isabelle told her to refrain from touching his body as he didn't have enough energy yet. She points at the food and says, "Didn't you say you needed food and nutrition to absorb the frozen river?" Frey asks, "Did you go to the village and come back?" Isabelle replies, "Yes, because earlier you said that you were left alone. I do not know what you are trying to accomplish in this world, but I trust you." Isabelle then tells Frey not to say that he is alone anymore. Frey now realizes what he was lacking. What he doesn't have is resolve or courage. It is the struggle within those who are currently alive. The ice energy from the frozen river was so enormous that even the Drake King sensed it from the battlefield. The Phoenix uses this chance when the Drake King is distracted by the power of the frozen river and attacks him in the eyes. The Drake King gets very furious because of the pain and attacks the Phoenix with his jaws, slamming her onto the ground. The Phoenix was on the verge of death, but she still had a grin on her face, which made the Drake King even more furious. As he was going to trample and kill the Phoenix, suddenly a huge shockwave erupts from the cave and directly attacks the Dragon King. He was able to fly away and managed to stay safe from the attack. But the Dragon King realizes that this attack was very dangerous and wonders what is happening inside the cave. Another wave of huge shockwaves comes out of the cave. But this time they are not only targeting the Drake Kings but also the other minion drakes. All of the dragons who got caught in the shockwave got freed to the point that they got covered in ice, and then the ice broke and they all died. It's the first time in the 1,000-year-long life of the Dragon King that he is feeling the emotions of fear, and his instincts are telling him to run away. Frey comes out of the cave wrapped around in an enormous amount of energy, and the Drake King realizes that Frey is the incarnation of fear. He uses all of his power and flies away as fast as he can. The Drake King himself was shocked, as he is afraid of a measly human. But suddenly, out of nowhere, Frey appears directly in front of Drake King, which made him fear so much that he almost spit in his pants. Frey then summons a ton of ice spears and attacks the Dragon King with all of the spears at once. The Drake King suffered only some minor injuries with this attack, and then he tries to locate Frey to attack him, but he isn't able to find him. Frey tells the monster that his arrogance has weakened him. How can a 1,000-year-old monster like him solely rely on his eyes? Now we see that Frey was standing, or we can say, floating, in front of the injured eyes of the monsters. Frey then summons a big ice spear and hits him again on the injured eyes. Now both Frey and the Drake King stand against each other, and the Drake King worriedly asks, "Are you even a human?" On the other side, Isabelle thinks that Frey should drag this fight out longer because he is already on the verge of collapse. Frey then summons a gigantic ice spear. The Drake King says this attack has such overwhelming energy. Is this going to be the final attack? The Drake King also puts all of his power into his final dragon breath attack and says to Frey, "I don't know how you became so much stronger, but this breath of mine defeated the phoenix, so a mere human like you with the ice attribute doesn't stand a chance against it." As the ice and fire attacks collide with each other, it creates a very magnificent and beautiful view on the skies of Aspania Mountain. Soon enough, Frey's attack became weaker and he started to get pushed back. But we see that the reason why Frey's attack got weaker was because Frey was not present to put more energy into it. Frey appears above the Drake King and cuts his head off in one fell swoop using a huge Grim Reaper-style scythe. Isabel, who was watching everything, realized that Frey had instantly moved behind the Drake King and fucked him from behind. Isabel still couldn't believe that Frey actually killed a 1,000-year-old Dragon King. Isabel looks at Frey and thinks he did all this while being in an imperfect form. Just how powerful was Lucas Trauman in his prime? Frey then suddenly loses consciousness and starts to fall from the sky. Isabel quickly goes and catches him, and when she touches Frey's body, she tells Frey that his entire body is frozen solid. Frey tells Isabel to take him to the Phoenix. While they were on their way, Isabel told Frey that he was really incredible, as he defeated the Dragon King so easily. Frey says that the Drake King was lacking in battle experience, even though he was over 1,000 years old. Slaughtering humans and fighting properly are two different things. You need strength and tactics when fighting against powerful opponents. Frey says, "I made Drake King think that I was about to make my decisive attack with all my strength, but in reality, I used 80% of my mana to create the ice spear and the remaining 20% to move behind Drake King and make an ice scythe." When they reached their destination, the phoenix had already breathed its last breath. Frey uses floating magic and picks up the phoenix. He says, "The phoenix saved my life, so I will revive him again." Frey takes the phoenix near the dead body of the Drake King. Isabel was shocked to see that the flame energy within Drake King's heart was being absorbed into the phoenix. Frey says that as a phoenix, it can definitely revive with all this energy. Frey says now that the Drake King is dead, there will be a battle between the drakes of this valley. They will fight to decide who will reign over these mountains next. Frey orders the phoenix to become the ruler of these mountains and protect his friend's dungeon so it doesn't get defiled by a second or third Drake King. Frey then bids him goodbye and says he looks forward to the day we meet again. Now we see that they are now inside a village named Cosfany. Frey is now almost fully healed and is sitting peacefully on a bench. Isabel arrives there and tells them that she had reserved a ship, but there weren't any ships departing today. Isabel gives him juice and asks, "How are you?" Frey tells her that he is fine but just needs to put on some weight. Isabel says the equipment we recovered from the Drake King's nest seems to be having an effect. The powerful fire attribute of the salamander's cloak made by Dumbledore appears to stabilize the frozen river's cold energy. Isabel then asks, was there a need to take all of the items within the nest? The spatial storage bag is almost full. Frey tells Isabel that they may be useless, but he cannot let his friend's keepsakes rot in such a place. Isabel tells Frey that the new semester is soon going to start, but this vacation was so long that it felt like a few years had passed. Frey winks and says they have only been in the mountains for a week. Isabel asks Frey's opinion about going to Lord Peruin's house. Isabel further says that his mansion is in this area, and they have to stay here for today either way since there is no ship departing today. Frey and Isabel then reach Jun's house. Both Isabel and Frey were shocked to see such a huge mansion. The gatekeeper asks them why their business is coming here. Frey nonchalantly asks if Peru is here. The gatekeeper asks about Frey's identity, and he just says that he is a friend of his and that his name is Frey Blake. We see that in the past, Peruvians told the gatekeeper that his friends could come visit during the vacation. His name is Frey, and he is the third son of the Blake family. If he does come here, treat him like you would treat me. At the same time, a carriage arrives there, and the soldier notifies her that she has returned. A very hot and beautiful lady comes out of the carriage and asks, what is the matter here? The gatekeeper tells him that a man who claims to be the young master's friend has come. The young lady greets him and says, you must be Frey. I have heard a lot about you from my brother. The beautiful lady then points at Isabel and says, you must be Lady Isabel. Isabel then asks her about her identity, and she introduces herself as the Peruin's little sister, Lilia. She then offers them a ride in her carriage to take them inside the mansion. Isabel was blushing, and she complimented Lady Lilia about her beauty and said, even though I am a woman, you take my breath away. The gatekeeper worriedly interrupts and tells Lady Lilia that they still haven't been able to confirm the identities of Frey and Isabel yet. Lady Lilia simply looks at the gatekeeper, which makes the gatekeeper totally bewitched by her beauty, and he quickly lets them in. Frey thinks that he still can't see the main building, even though they got past the gate quite a while ago. He wonders about how large this estate is. Frey then asks Lady Lilia why she is staring so intently at him. He asks her if she wants to say something. Lady Lilia says, "You are a lot different than the way my brother treated you. Your hair is white instead of ashen gray." Frey looks at his hair and says a lot of things have happened on their journey. Lady Lilia says, "Please speak freely. You are my brother's friend and also a child of the Blake household." Frey instantly starts to address Lady Lilia informally, which really surprises her. Frey then argues that she was the one who asked to speak freely. Lady Lilia then changes the topic and says that she has heard that Frey is attending Westrad Academy with my brother. She then asks how Peruvians perform at the academy. Frey brazenly replies that he has no idea, as Peruvian is 2 years above him and they don't meet often. Lady Lilia thinks that if he is 2 years younger than Peruvian, he is not that much older than herself. When they reach the mansion, Peruvian was waiting there to greet them. Peruvian greets them and says that he has been waiting for them. He then asks Frey if he completed his business, and Frey says, "Yes, I did it almost." Peruvian then asks about Frey's changed hair color, and Frey replies that he tried to change his looks a little bit. Frey then tells Peruvian that he is exhausted and starving right now. Peruvian laughs and says, "I can see that even if you don't say anything." Lady Lilia looks at Peruvian and thinks that she has never seen his brother smile so happily before. She taunts his brother, "I guess you don't care much about me, brother." Peruvian smiles and says that's not true. There is no way I would ignore our little princess. Frey feels very weird when he hears Peruvian. Lady Lilia then says that Peruvian didn't even care to ask about her while she was standing beside her, and then she goes inside the mansion. Peruvian gets worried and says this is bad. My sister often gets mad, but the reason is always a mystery. Frey again makes a disgusting face and says, "In my opinion, you calling your sister princess without any hesitation is even more of a mystery." Peruvian asks about what he did in the mountains of hell. Frey asks him how he knows about their destination because he hasn't told him about it yet. Peruvian says, "Didn't you save my fiancé in the mountains?" Frey gets confused upon hearing this, but Isabel explains that Peruvian is talking about Lady Sonia. Frey smiles and says it looks like she arrived safely. Frey sighs and says Lady Sonia is still training her sword skills relentlessly. She is an incredibly hard worker. No wonder she got the title Rainstorm at that age. Frey agrees and tells Peruvian this is true. She is being wasted on you. Frey asks Peruvian where they are headed right now. Peruvian say that it's a family rule for all guests of the house to greet the family head first. Peruvian stops at the door of his father's room and says, "I will introduce you to my father." Now we see that Frey and Isabel are sitting at the dining table with all the family members from Peru. Peruvian's father then says, "Nice to meet you, Frey," and then he asks about how Count Blake is doing these days. Frey says that he is doing well. Meanwhile, Isabel was terrified because of the aura from Peruvian's father. Frey thinks that he is only borrowing Frey's body and has never met him before. Frey thinks that the K-Jun family's head, Shepherd Jun, is one of the 5 7-star magicians of the Empire, and the master of the 4th magic tower. He might have some information about demigods. Peruvian's father further says the 6th magic tower is quite far away, so I can only meet with the Count Blake once a year during the magic tower conference. Frey looks at Peruvian's father's face and identifies the Dumbledore's magic tattoo. Peruvian's father shows his gratitude to Frey for saving his son and his son's fiancée. Peruvian's father asks Frey about what business he had in the mountains of hell. Frey says that he had some personal matters to attend to there. Peruvian's father asks to elaborate, but Frey says that it is a trivial thing that is undeserving of his attention. Peruvian's father laughs and asks Peruvian about how the preparations are going for the banquet. Peru says that everything is going according to schedule. Peruvian's father says many important guests will attend this banquet. He will personally supervise it as practice for the future. Fred then tries to ask Fred to attend the banquet, but his father interrupts and says there is magic, which I have personally researched recently. I would like to hear your opinion on it. Peruvian's father further says there is no need to feel pressured. I need a new point of view and ideas. I would like your opinion as a young mage of the newer generation. Peruvian and other family members then get up from the dining table, and Peruvian tells Frey that he will be waiting for him at the banquet hall. Frey tells Isabel to go and help Peruvian in his place. Now only Frey and Peruvian's father remain in the room. Peruvian's father gets serious and asks Frey to reveal his true intentions and tell him what he is scheming. Peruvian's father further clarifies and asks why the trauma rings have come to his estate. Frey wonders what trauma rings is, and he tells her that there must be a misunderstanding between them. Peruvian's father angrily says it was cunning of you to use Peruvian. Did you also hear that I would be present at home these days from Peru? Peruvian's father then points his finger at Frey and says, aren't you being a bit too arrogant? You are openly wearing those in front of me like it's nothing. Frey asks for further clarification, and Peryuan's father tells him that he is talking about the typhoon earrings. Frey then remembers the trauma rings in the club that Peryuan leads within the academy. Frey then says, I do not understand what you are talking about, your grace. I obtained these earrings myself in the Uspania mountains. Peryuan's father asks, are you not part of the trauma rings? Frey says Peryuan did invite me to join it once, but I refused because I do not like being chained down to a group. Peryuan's father gets overly excited and says, I am not talking about the club Peryuan is leading, but about them. He stops midway through talking as he realizes something. He then sits down and says that it appears that I misunderstood something. You may let your guard down. Frey says, if you so desire, I will accept your grace. Peryuan's father asks Frey, just where do you think you are? Frey replies that he is at his friend's house. He further says, I have simply come here to visit my friend. With all due respect, I did not have an ounce of thought about meeting you, your grace. Peryuan's father says he doesn't fully trust Frey yet, but he will try to change his opinion of him. Peryuan's father asks Frey to tell his background, as he has to consider Frey one of them as long as he wears those earrings. Peryuan's father then asks Frey, who do you think is the master of the continent? Frey gets quite shocked when he suddenly hears this. Peryuan's father continues and says that among the nations founded by humans, the Cascow Empire must be the greatest. Even so, it is barely 10% of the entire continent's size. If the power of intelligent creatures on the continent can be gauged up to 10 fingers, then the power of humans can only be considered at 3 fingers. It would be difficult to call ourselves the masters of the continent with this much power. Peryuan's father gets a very serious expression in his face, and he says there is another master. The true master, a transcendent being who controls the continent from the shadows, the demigods. A semi-divine existence that transcends humanity. They are the true predators who control human society. Peryuan's father further says that this may sound like a foolish conspiracy theory to a young man like Frey, but there are such beings behind the scenes of this world. Now we see that Frey is shivering in excitement, and Peryuan's father asks him why he is suddenly laughing. On the other side, Frey thinks that there were only 5 of them. They were the only ones who put their lives on the line to oppose the demigod. Frey believed that the demigod had fully retaken control of this world and that the people living here had no idea about the twisted laws and rules of this world. Frey was very surprised to know that there are still people who have this mindset, and that they have been increasing their numbers. Frey thinks, how could I not smile? For the first time since returning to this world, I see the light of hope. Peryuan's father asks Frey if he has prior knowledge about demigods. Frey agrees, and Peru's father again asks, how did he know? Frey calms down and thinks that he should reveal his identity even if this man is an ally. And then he says, I read about them in Dumbledore's note when I obtained these earrings. Peryuan's father again gets hyper-excited and says, are you really talking about the great sage Dumbledore's note? Frey simply nods his head to confirm his question. Peryuan's father realizes that Frey is telling him to share the information first. Now Peru's father says that the information we have about demigods is small and scarce. We do not know how many there are or if they even exist. Their ultimate goal is unknown, and we haven't found out why they keep acting behind the scenes without showing themselves. But there is one thing we are sure of. They are powerful enough to wipe every single species off the face of the earth on a whim and still have some strength remaining in them. Frey felt a little relieved because Peru's father knows at least the important stuff. Frey thinks that I am certain that they aren't numerous. There shouldn't be over 100 of them. However, each and every one of them is similar to gods, and they are similar to destruction. Peryuan's father now further says that 4,000 years ago, there were 5 heroes who stood up against demigods. They are famous people that everyone has heard of. Great Sage Dumbledore, Magic Warrior King Cassian, Blade King Lucid, Black Witch Iris, and Great Mage Lucas. But after the Great Mage vanished, history changed. A rift split the Magic Warrior King and Blade King apart. The Black Witch erased all traces of her. Guys really hope she will still be alive through immortality magic, and she will come later as a mega MILF to stand aside Frey. Back to the story, the Great Sage was the only one to remain and fight until the end, but he couldn't face the demigod on his own. With that, the names of these people became history. Frey thinks that what Peryuan's father told him exactly matches the events written in Dumbledore's diary, and Frey believes that he can trust this man. Peryuan's father further says that our circle is an organization that has inherited their will. Frey asks what a circle is, and Peru's father says, I generalize it as one circle. We are all separated and divided throughout the continent. As time passed, the will we had inherited was split up. We are in a situation where we are keeping each other in check. Frey says it always becomes political when 3 or more people gather. Peryuan's father further says we are divided into countless circles, but the most influential ones are straw necklaces, fist-founder armlets, and lucid swords. Frey assumes that these circles use the names of the past heroes, and he wonders what happened to Kassajan and Lucas Trauman's named circles. Peryuan's father says I don't know much about the other circles, but I have heard that the situation for trauma survivors isn't very good. Apparently, the circle master died, and half of the executives joined other circles. Frey got pissed off after hearing this, but he controlled himself and asked, what about Kassajan, the Magic Warrior King's successors? Peryuan's father says Kassajan's title of Magic Warrior King is passed down to one person at a time, but we have no idea about their whereabouts. Frey asks, is the circle not related to the club at the academy, even though they have the same name? Peryuan's father says the club is something that those young students decided to create on a whim. When we discover some geniuses within the academy, we bring them over to our sides at times. But the students do not know about the existence of the circles. Peryuan's father further says it's actually better if there are other organizations with the same name as ours since we are better hidden and less likely to get caught. We never know where demigods' eyes and ears can reach. Peryuan's father says this is everything I can tell you. Now it's your turn to tell. I have heard the rumors about Dumbledore's dungeon in Aspania Mountain. Frey says I was lucky because I was in a difficult situation and ran to an unknown area, and happened to find Dumbledore's dungeon. The Peryuan father again got very excited, and he asked, did you find the diary you mentioned earlier in there? And Frey agreed. Guys, I think if Frey tells him a little more about him, he will die of a heart attack. Peryuan's father asks Frey how he can get there too. Frey says he cannot tell the location because he also found it accidentally. Peryuan's father says he still can't completely erase the suspicions he has about Frey. He also asks Frey to show the effects of the typhoon earrings. Frey activates the artifact, and suddenly a lot of mana gathers around him. After witnessing the artifact's power, Peryuan's father says that he wasn't suspicious of Frey just because he thought Frey was a member of the Trauman Rings. There is a greater reason than that. Now the scene changes, and it's evening time, and a party is going on inside the Jun house. A lot of people belonging to the noble families had arrived and were enjoying the party. We see that Frey has dressed up pretty nicely, but he is standing alone in a corner, and he was thinking that he finally found someone who knows about demigods. But things actually got more complicated now. Frey says I need to find out more about the circles, learn to control the frozen river's energy, and complete Dumbledore's golem, Anastasia. Frey's head is starting to hurt because he has to worry about so many things at once. He then ponders the fact that it might not be a complete coincidence that he synchronized with Frey as well. Isabel arrives there and asks him what he is thinking about so deeply. She then shows off her dress and asks how she looks. She further tells her that Lady Lily especially prepared this dress for her. Frey looks at her and says, it must be so nice for you to be able to live without any worries. Now we see inside Frey's memories, where he was talking with Peru's father. He tells Frey that a month ago he heard a report during the Magic Towers conference that someone had gotten in touch with a demigod. Frey gets pretty shocked and asks who was the person who contacted the demigod. Peryuan's father tells us that the person is Isaka Blake, who is also the father of Frey Blake. Back to the present, we see a rat-like looking person trying to flatter another person by flattering him. The rat-type person was trying to manipulate him so that he could get invited to the Deer House's banquet. On the other side, Sonia arrives in the hall and goes to meet Frey and Isabel. Frey was intently looking at Sonia while they were greeting each other. So Sonia asks Frey, is there something wrong? Frey then points at Sonia and tells Isabel, this is what you call looking beautiful. Isabel asks Frey why he always acts mean toward her. While Frey and Isabel were nagging each other, we saw that Sonia was getting too blushy because of the compliments she just got from Frey. Frey looks at Sonia and says her face looks pretty red. He then proceeds to offer her a glass of wine, which he has already drunk half of. Isabel thinks that Frey is so dense when it comes to women's feelings. The rat-looking person arrives there and tells Frey that he had never expected to see Frey in a place like this. Isabel asks Frey if he knows this rat bastard. Frey tries to check his memories to find out who this person is. But before Frey could remember anything, the rat bastard said, what an unexpected surprise. To think that I would see the trash of the Blake house here. Frey thinks that there is no need to check his memories because he is just a dick. The rat man says no matter how trashy you are, I guess you could participate in this banquet organized by Peryuan through the Blake house's connection. The rat man was very jealous of Frey because it was very hard for him to get an invitation as a countryside aristocrat. The rat man further, you even managed to get into Westroad Academy through connections. The academy, even though I couldn't enter. Frey stops his blabbering and asks him to get lost. Sonya then asks the rat man if he is close to Frey. The rat man says yes, he is very close. This dude isn't someone who is capable of talking back normally. The rat boy's attention now turns to Sonya and Isabelle, and he wonders who these two super hot girls are. The next question that comes to his mind is, what are these two ladies doing together with trash like Frey? The Deer House noble arrives there and asks the rat man if there is any problem. The man introduces himself to Lady Sonya as the eldest son of the Deer House, and his name is Patrick. Sonya also introduces herself as Sonya Aquareed. The rat man hypothesizes that Sonya doesn't know what kind of man Frey is since she is from a foreign country. The rat man thinks this is perfect. He should use this opportunity to humiliate you once and for all. The rat man quickly apologizes to Sonya for not recognizing Lord Peryuin's fiancée. Sonya quickly turns towards Frey and tells him that the marriage is not set in stone yet. Frey asks her why she is telling him this. The rat bastard says, I am amazed by your consideration to greet every guest as the organizer's fiancé. However, Frey Blake is not someone worthy of your consideration and attention, Lady Sonya. Now we can clearly see the anger in the eyes of both of the hot ladies after hearing this. Now Patrick insults Frey by comparing him to his brother, and he also tells everyone that Frey has been banished from the Blake household. Isabelle gets pretty angry at these remarks and says, I do not know who you are, but everyone in this banquet cannot even reach Frey's ankles in terms of skill. She asks Patrick to apologize to Frey. Frey pats her back and tells her to calm down. Patrick says that the person who needs to apologize is the one who invited this unworthy man to this prestigious party. Peryuin appears out of nowhere and says, it looks like I have offended you. The one who invited Frey was me. Both of the bastard nobles were shocked after hearing the statement. Peryuin now sarcastically apologizes to Patrick for disappointing him. He further says, I wasn't aware that I needed the Deer House's permission to invite a friend of mine. Peryuin says that Frey is the most valuable guest among all the invitees at tonight's party. The nobles started to frantically apologize, but Peryuin says there is no need to be so nervous. This place is my house, and you are my guest. Peryuin then goes near the rat bastard and says, but if this weren't a party, you would be dead by now. The nobles were so scared that they ran away with their tails between their legs. Frey comments that Peryuin is a lot more vicious than he expected, and Peryuin replies that he was just trying to imitate Frey. Frey says, I am super gentle and kind. Peryuin says, have you ever used this thing called a mirror? Frey says that his reflection is so bright and shiny that he can't stare in the mirror. Peryuin asks if Frey started to get bald. Both Isabelle and Sonya started to laugh after hearing them fight like kids. Peryuin now gets serious and says, you are very strange, Frey. The strength you showed back on the Corteso. If the world knew of it, no one would call you the trash of the Count's family. Frey says that a man shouldn't go around and show off like that. Peryuin then asks Frey about what his father said to him. Frey says he was suspicious that I was part of the trauma rings. Peryuin thinks that Frey is talking about the club at the school, and he asks if Frey has any intentions of joining the club, which Frey denies. We then again go back in time to the memories of Frey, and here Peryuin's father tells Frey that the reason he could clear his suspicions of Frey was not just because he could use the typhoon earrings. There was someone else who guaranteed Frey's identity. Frey asks about the person who did it. Peryuin's father tells us that he was Heinz Blake, or his own big brother. Peryuin's father tells him that Heinz Blake is a member of the Stro Necklaces like him. He further says to Frey that he knows what your family did to you. You must have received countless wounds and scars. I am not in a position to say this, but if I may allow myself, Heinrich is different from Isaka and Michael. He agreed to your banishment for a different reason. Back to reality, Frey says, I don't plan on returning to the academy. Isabelle gets utterly shocked after what she hears from Frey. Isabelle thinks that if Frey doesn't return to the academy, what would she do there without him? Peryuin asks Frey what he is planning on doing from now on. Frey says he is not sure, but the Duke, or we can say Peryuin's father, recommended he join the third magic tower. Peryuin says that at the third magic tower, the training curriculum isn't anything amazing, but the quality and quantity of the magic books they have are the best among the magic towers. On that night, after the party is finished, we see Isabelle being very upset while thinking about tomorrow, when Frey will leave for the magic tower and Isabelle will have to return to the academy. Isabelle thinks that deep in her heart, she knew this day would arrive sometime soon after she learned that Frey is Lucas Trauman. Isabelle then goes to the room where Frey and Peryuin are talking. Inside the room, we see Frey thanking Peryuin because he had a lot of fun at the banquet. Frey further says that the fame and prestige of the name Peryuin were quite impressive to see. You must be the genius of the century, born into the Jun house. Peryuan says I might be a genius because the day I first learned seize mana was when I was 5 years old. Frey asks the Peryuan if he is trying to show off. But Frey was also surprised by this information because even Dumbledore first sensed mana at the age of 7. Which means Peryuan is a true genius. Peryuan says that he reached the 4-star age at the age of 17. But they wrote down on the official records that he was 20 years old at that time. Frey asks him why he did that. Peryuan's expression gets serious, and he says, Frey, I have never shared my honest feelings. But I will say this for the first time in my life just because it's you. I think of my talent as a curse. Peryuan now tells his story and says he once had an instructor. He was a 6-star magician and the vice master of the 5th magic tower. He was a knowledgeable elderly man with a white beard that reached his chest. Whenever I asked him questions, he would answer with a gentle and kind smile while patting my head. I used to love his teaching methods so much that I studied even harder to be able to ask more questions. He was the man who sprouted my will to study magic and enjoy it. At least, that was what I thought. It was not long after I reached 4-star. One day, I asked my teacher a question that even he couldn't answer. He was quite bewildered. He shouted at me and called me a monster. He was completely enraged. He had a face filled with terror. The teacher was watching me develop my abilities at a terrifying speed and was hiding ominous and sinister feelings deep in his heart. After that day, I lost my path and goal in life. I still enjoy studying magic today. But whenever I fully immerse myself in something, whenever something reaches the depths of my heart, that face keeps resurfacing like a curse and stops me from advancing. Every day, I curse my talents more than 1,000 times. Peryuan got very emotional, and he cryingly said that if I were ordinary instead, I would have been able to learn magic more passionately and enjoy it so much more. I wouldn't have been called a monster by anyone. Frey puts his hands on Peryuan's shoulder and sarcastically says, "Stop being so cheeky, you punk." Frey tells Peryuans to listen carefully, and he says there is a level that people with amazing abilities, who cannot even be labeled as geniuses because even the word genius cannot justify them, cannot reach. Even if they work tirelessly while vomiting blood until their demise, they will never reach that state. That is the pinnacle of magic. Frey further says that if you get unmotivated because you met an unqualified instructor and were the target of his jealousy, you will never reach the pinnacle. Frey then suddenly uses the name demigod, and Peryuan reacts to this name like he already knows about their existence. Frey says, I knew that you were also aware of their existence. The despicable god that controls all the intelligent beings in the world. It's humanity's fault for not being aware that they are living under his tyrannical rule, but humanity still has the potential to defeat him. Frey then looks towards Peryuan and says, if your goal is to live an extravagant life at the magic tower and show off your skills, your current talent is more than enough. However, if you wish to defeat a demigod, your unique objective should be the pinnacle of magic. Frey proudly says, my goal is the pinnacle of magic. What is yours? Frey sighs a little and says, I think a teacher isn't the only person who can help you find your path in life. Are you telling me to find my own path in life? Frey suddenly reminisces about the past, where he was fighting with a demigod while standing beside his best friend, Dumbledore. Frey will then say, I will always be one step ahead of you, so don't worry too much. Peryuan turns around and says that the day we meet again, I will be ahead of you. Now we see that outside of the room, Isabelle had listened to their whole conversation. I don't know why she is crying after hearing everything. The next day, we see Frey outside, appreciating the perfect weather to leave on his journey. Isabelle arrives there and says, are you planning on leaving your baggage behind? Frey says, what are you talking about? I don't have any baggage with me. Isabelle asks, so why did you call me with all those names before, like baggage, burden, and hindrance? Frey asks Isabelle if she is going to follow him. What about the academy? Isabelle says, I am planning on studying magic to the very limits, and history's greatest mage is before my eyes right now, so why would I take anyone else as my teacher? Frey warns her and says she is going to regret this decision. Isabelle says that even if you were walking down the highway to hell, I would still follow you till the end. Now we see that Michael Bastard is telling the story of what happened in the banquet hall to Frey's biggest brother. But Frey's big brother acted like he didn't care about them and told Michael to get lost. But after he left the room, the brother talks with the second elder brother, Heinz, and says that it was very unexpected that Frey is a very close friend of Peru. But Heinrich replies that it would be surprising if they got close considering they both attend the same academy. The eldest brother wonders if he should report these to his father and try to use them to their advantage. Now we see that Isabelle is looking at a badge and asking Frey about it. Frey tells us that he got it from Duke Shepard, or we can say Peryuan's father. This badge is some sort of qualification needed to be able to take the entrance test for his circle. Isabel says that she had never even heard of the name demigod until recently, and even in school, they were taught that the 5 heroes were the great masters who were trying to rectify the world's system. Isabel says that if it weren't for Frey, she would have never even believed in the existence of the demigods. Frey says that the scariest type of dominance is the one that is invisible to the eyes. Those under that kind of rule aren't capable of thinking for themselves and planning their future. They can only let time pass and eat what is given to them. They get drunk on the feeling of satisfaction and achievement and become happy slaves who aren't even aware that they are being controlled. That is the current situation for humanity. Frey gets angry with Isabel and asks her if she just lost against the demigod. Frey angrily says, "I never lost against him. I am in the process of winning." Fred and Isabel reach the 3rd magic tower, and Fred thinks that there is half a year left until he can join the circle. Until then, he needs to stabilize the frozen river's energy and train until he regains his original strength. Frey gets a little nostalgic and remembers how he used to fully immerse himself in magic studies at a magic tower. Suddenly, a bunch of dark elves also arrive there. Frey was quite shocked to see dark elves, but Isabel said that elves and dwarfs are species that are free to travel among human countries. Frey says that he did read about it back in the academy, but it was quite surprising to see them in person. This could never have happened 4,000 years ago. Frey remembers reading that the elves managed to completely unify, and the entire jungle in the far north is their territory. A few days have passed in the 3rd tower, and we see that Isabel has gotten used to the battling training technique now. On the other side, we see that Frey is also practicing, but it looks like he is doing some weird dance steps. An unknown man comes and comments about Frey, saying that there are many rumors about him roaming around the tower. He just performs a weird dance all day and stays in the library all night. People say that a very odd and bizarre person entered the tower. The movements done by Frey indeed look bizarre at first glance. Now that Isabel has become familiar with battling technique and can read the flow of Kai, she can see the incredible moves hidden within his dance. Frey attacks at a speed that can't be followed by the naked eye and returns to his initial position, which makes it look like a wavy and flowy dance. But in truth, it's an astonishingly high-level martial art. On the other side, we saw a man falling to the ground, and the reason for it was because he just lost against the Dark Elf in a spar. The man admits his defeat, and the Dark Elf remarks that he is a weak human. The Dark Elf's master comes from behind and says that this is a disrespectful thing to tell someone who has admitted his defeat. The Dark Elf goes and apologizes to the defeated man. The Dark Elf notices Frey doing the weird dance steps, but because he is an elf, he is able to see Frey's hidden movements. He then goes and asks Frey if he is a magic warrior, but Frey tells him that he is a magician. And it was a little hard to believe for the Dark Elf, because those aren't the movements of a magician. The Dark Elf introduces himself as Liamson, and he asks Frey to fight him. Frey gets confused as to why a Dark Elf is asking him to fight out of the blue. Liamson apologizes to him and says he didn't mean to say there was another word for it. The master of the Dark Elf comes, and Liamson also agrees that he wants to spar. The master introduces herself as Camel and greets Frey. She then points at Isabel and asks, "Who is this cute lady over there?" Isabel then introduces herself to them. Camel apologizes for disturbing Frey during the training and says you don't need to pay attention to this moron's words. Liamson starts to argue with Camel in elf language and starts asking permission to spar with Frey. Isabel, who couldn't understand the language, asked Frey what they were talking about. Frey then proceeds to speak the elf language and says he is always available for a spar. Liamson, surprisingly, says you can speak Elvish. You are such an interesting human. Frey then replies that he could say the same about Liamson, an elf learning human magic. Liamson comments that Frey talks like the elders of their clan. Liamson now gets into the fighting position, and Frey notices the unique and elaborate movements of a dark elf. Liamson jumps and kicks, but Frey blocks the attack. They can continue to spar at an incredible speed. The spectators were shocked to see such ridiculous speed. The elves wanted to know Frey's identity, as he is fighting on an equal footing with Liamson, the next leader. Camel confirms from Frey's muscle mass that he is not a magic warrior, and she wonders how Frey blocks all of Liamson's attacks with such a skinny body. Camel then orders them to stop the spar, as both of them have been pretty much exhausted. Liamson then compliments Frey for his incredible movements, and Frey says the same. Frey says that if they were fighting in the wild at night, he would have been overpowered. Frey also asks Liamson if he is not used to hand-to-hand combat. Liamson laughs out loud and then asks Frey how long he is going to stay in these magic towers. Frey replies that he would be staying here for around a half year. Camel asks Frey why he came here to the third magic tower. Frey says there is a certain elixir that he wants to brew, so he chose the magic tower with the most specialized books. Camel says that's why you shut yourself in the library every evening. Frey says this magic tower might have been the wrong choice. I couldn't find the information I needed even after going through all the books. Camel suggests Frey read the magic books. She further says that the library is only stocked with third grade books. To read grade 1 magic books, you need to pass the magic book reading rights exam and receive the recognition of 3 floor masters. Frey further asks about the exams and asks, where can I take them? Camel smiles and says that the exam is going to happen tomorrow. The next day at the exam site, people were gossiping about how Frey fought on equal footing with the dark elf. They were pretty amazed by the fact that a magic warrior like Frey came here to pass the exam. Camel and Liamson also arrive there, and they tell Frey that they came here to watch them. Camel then points at Liamson and says that he doesn't have anything else to do, so she brings him along. Frey also points at Isabel and says that's the same case for her too. Liamson enthusiastically goes to Frey and says, let's fight after this exam is over. Now 3 people in white robes arrive there, and Camel tells Frey that they are the floor masters of this tower. The man in the middle is Mikkel, and he is the real deal. Mikkel announced that they wouldn't say any bullshit, and would start the exam right away. He then orders everyone to create an energy ball. He then orders me to compress the energy ball. The examinee thought that this exam was pretty simple, as it might be only the first test. Mikkel puts his hand inside his robe and takes out a marble. He then proceeds to drop a bomb and says you will pass if you compress it to a size smaller than this. Everyone tried their best to compress the energy ball, but they were all deemed failures by the examiner. We then see Isabel struggling too much to compress the energy ball, but she was able to do so and was deemed passable by Mikkel. Mikkel then moves toward the dark elves, and we see that they have compressed the energy ball so much that it's barely visible. Mikkel says that there is no need for them to take the other test as they are already qualified enough. On the other side, we see that one examiner is asking Frey what he is doing by just standing there. When Mikkel noticed Frey, he was shocked, and he then told the other examiner to not rely on sight but feel the mana. Frey had compressed it to a size that is imperceptible to the human eye. Mikkel tells him too that there is no need to take any more tests, and then he notices Frey's typhoon earrings and asks to meet in private. Now we see that both of them are inside a room, all alone. Mikkel tells Frey that his skills are impressive, and he asks him why he came to the third magic tower. Frey says that it was Peru's father, also known as Duke Shefford, who recommended it. Mikkel says, let's not beat around the bush. I believe that you have reached the 5-star stage. Frey agrees on this claim, but he didn't tell Mikkel that he was aiming for the 7th-star stage. Mikkel asks Frey if he knows about the demigod. Frey says that he is aware of them to a certain extent. Mikkel says that a while ago, people found traces of demigods at Yushiano village. To be precise, it was traces of the apostles. Mikkel explains that apostles are people who were chosen by demigods and wield divine power. Frey was shocked to know that demigods are now using humans. He had never heard of something like this before. There weren't any apostles 4,000 years ago. Mikkel tells that Yushiano is under his and the shepherd's jurisdiction. Mikkel further says several villages and towns will be destroyed in no time, so we must soon leave to investigate. Mikkel asks Frey if he would like to accompany him during the investigation. Frey immediately agrees to this offer. Mikkel says it's a dangerous mission, and he can give him some more time to think about it. Frey then asks Mikkel why he chose him for the investigation. Mikkel then pulls the robe into his hand and shows a relic of Irish. Frey realizes that this guy is a part of the Fistfounder armlets. Mikkel tells us that the Dark Elves at the Magic Tower are reinforcements from the Black Tooth that they requested with that objective in mind. Mikkel tells me that he has gotten very anxious and distraught about others, and then he met Frey, a young man wearing the typhoon earring. Frey thinks that even though he made the earrings for no real reason, it seems they got pretty famous. Mikkel asks Frey why he wants to read magic books. Frey says that there is an elixir he wants to brew and that he needs to study alchemy for it. Mikkel says that in that case, instead of looking for magic, it would be better to ask for help. Now we see Frey in front of a young professor lady, and when the madam inquires about him, Frey introduces himself and says that Lord Mikkel sent him to this place. This lady is Professor Adelia. She is famous for being the genius professor at Westroad Academy, but this is the first time Frey has seen her for real. Professor Adelia invites her into her messy laboratory room. She tells Frey to just sit somewhere, but Frey says that there is nowhere to sit. Now the professor says I am very busy, very tired, and have very low blood pressure, so don't beat around the bush and get to the point within 4 words. She asks Frey what he wants, and Fred answers in 4 words. Brew a mana potion. The professor tells Frey that he is quite a cheeky person and asks him what kind of mana potion he wants. Frey takes out a glass container and tells the professor to look at it herself. When Professor Adelia examined it, she was quite shocked, and she asked what was with the incredibly dense mana inside. Frey then again says only 4 words, "It's the mana of." He then stops and asks permission to answer in more words. Professor Adelia was pretty annoyed by this behavior and asked Frey to answer normally. Frey then tells us that it was the heart of Drake that lived for 1,000 years. The mana energy is estimated to be around 100,000. Frey asks her if she can make it into an elixir. The professor's eye lit up in excitement, and she said this was completely insane. Frey asks her if it is too difficult for her, but she says that the technique is a bit hard but she can do it. The main problem is the ingredients. She says that it would need something that just can't be found. Frey asks about it, and she tells him that she needs a phoenix's feather. Fred takes the feather from the storage space and puts it on the table. The professor was utterly shocked, and Frey asked her if she needed anything more. She says that she also needs an excellent assistant who is skilled in mana control. He needs to be able to compress an energy ball to the size of a fingernail. Frey then creates an energy ball and shrinks it all the way to the size of a fingernail. Now we see that they have both started working on brewing the elixir. Professor Adelia suddenly asks about Frey's identity. She says that she has heard about Niskael and Heinz many times but has never heard the name Frey before. She further says that Frey's mana control and your knowledge of alchemy are very high. The knowledge is a bit outdated, though. Frey thinks about apologizing for having knowledge from 4,000 years ago. She asks Frey, if he is this skilled and talented, how come she has never heard his name before? She then suddenly pulled Frey through his collar. On the other side is Frey, who is a little nervous and wondering if he is finally going to lose his virginity. But Professor Adelia asks Frey to become his assistant. Frey disappointingly declined the offer. Professor Adelia goes down on Frey's knees and tells him that she would also give him a high hourly wage. But Frey still declines. Professor Adelia thinks that if someone like him becomes her assistant, it will be very practical, and she wonders what she should do to coax him. She then asks Frey why he keeps addressing her as professor. Frey tells me that he is a student at Westroad Academy. Professor Adelia becomes evil after hearing this and plans to blackmail Frey using his grade and future career as pretext. But Frey tells her that he has already dropped out of the academy. Frey then asks the professor if she is knowledgeable about creating golems. She says that it's not her specialty, but she's better than the average people out there who call themselves puppet masters. She then again becomes evil and says that if you want me to teach you, then you should become my assistant. Frey says that he doesn't want to learn it and asks if he has a core with a mana energy of about 1 million. How could he create a golem with it? She says that's completely insane. Frey turns around and says that when you say something is completely insane, it generally means that you are interested in it. She stands up and says, now I mean it for real this time. First of all, there is no way such a core exists. And even if it does, you won't be able to control it if you don't use orichalcum for its body and mithril for its nervous system. She summarizes that we need to craft the golem using ores that only exist in legends. She further says there is also plating to do, the blueprints to create and the commands to install. Creating its ego would be even more difficult. Frey thinks that the task Dumbledore left him to complete is more of a challenge than he expected. Professor Adelia asks Frey why he wants to know that, and she says, do you have a core with 1 million mana energy? Frey just smiles and doesn't answer a single thing. The next day, we see that Frey is again sparring with Liamson, and this time Liamson gets defeated. On the other side, we see that the Dark Elves are thanking Isabelle for teaching them magic. Camel comes there and tells Frey that Isabelle's teachings are easy to understand and very accurate. They have all opened their hearts to her. Isabelle now asks Frey if the elixir is complete. Frey tells me that it will be finished by tonight. Isabelle smiles and says that you are almost at the 7-star stage. Frey says that this is just the beginning and that there is a long way to go. Camel, who was listening to their conversation, wonders what 7 stars mean. She then remembers something and asks Frey and Isabelle if they want to learn spirit magic. Frey asks more about spirit magic, and Camel tells him that if you make a contract with a spirit, it will be of great help in the future. She further says, I will teach you the traditional spirit magic inherent to dark elves, as a token of gratitude for teaching my kids human magic. Now we see that the professor summoned Frey to tell her that she had already finished the elixir's brewing. But she worriedly asks Frey if he really is going to drink this. Frey gets a little confused and asks if there is any problem with the elixir. The professor says that it's the opposite. The quality of the elixir is too good. The mana energy was amplified to twice the normal amount. If someone consumes it adequately, Even their bones will melt without a trace. Frey quickly takes the elixir and says, "That's amazing news." The professor frowns a little and then says, "I don't care anymore. Do as you want. It's your own life, so why should I care?" Frey stops the professor and he puts his hand inside the spatial bag. He then takes out a necklace and gives it to the professor as a thank you gift. Professor Cecilia gets very flustered and she asks what the meaning behind this is. She says, "I am a teacher and you are a student. We must not do this. This world won't tolerate it." Frey says that he is not sure about what the professor is talking about, but if she wears that, it will improve her concentration and focus. Frey further explains that she can also use the ruby part. But before he could complete his sentence, the professor ran away like a love-smitten princess, saying that we couldn't be in a relationship, you idiot. Frey completes his word and says the ruby is used to measure mana properly. He concludes to himself that he can never understand that woman. On that night, we see Frey spreading some stones filled with ice-type mana all over his room. He then sits down and drinks the elixir. A huge amount of fire-type mana spreads around Frey. Now the scene changes, and we see Camel asking Isabel about how amazing it is to reach 7 stars in the human world. She further tells me that she has just recently started to learn human magic and is not too familiar with the system. Isabel thinks a little bit and says a 7-star magician would be called an archmage or grand magician. No matter what country you decide to settle in, you will be guaranteed a count title and be treated respectfully. In other words, your name would be recorded in history. Camel asks if Frey wants to succeed in life and become a count. Isabel denies it and says this stage is just the beginning for Frey. His goals are a lot more difficult to achieve than becoming strong and famous. Isabel takes the name of a demigod, which makes Camel's face very concerned. She further tells them that Frey wants to reclaim the world from them. On the other side, we see Frey has successfully achieved the 7-star stage. Now we see that the Tower Master, Dark Elves, Frey, and Isabel have departed to check for traces of demigods. They reach a small village where they detect the apostles. Isabel comments that the air around this place feels very ominous. Frey tells her that this is because of divine power. Frey gets very angry and says, "I haven't felt this sickening feeling for a long time that makes me want to throw up." Frey then asks the Tower Master about how powerful the humans personally selected by demigods are. The Tower Master changes the topic and says that this is a small village with fewer than 500 inhabitants. They don't even interact with surrounding villages since they are self-sufficient. The Bible says that this is a perfect location for the apostles to work. The Tower Master reminds Frey that this mission will be dangerous, and he points out that it might be a bit too burdensome for Isabel. Frey tells her that there is no need to worry. Despite her appearance, Isabel can fend for herself. Isabel tells everyone that someone is coming towards them. A person arrives there and recognizes them as the magicians of the Magic Tower. He asks them for what reason they have come to this undeserving place. The Tower Master, Michael, asks them if there has been anything that has changed recently, like the lifestyle or anything trivial. The mayor says that this is just a small village, and their daily lives are the same every day. Frey then asks him where all the villagers are. Frey further says, "I don't see residents, even though it's broad daylight. It's like an abandoned village." The mayor hesitates and says there were a few circumstances today in the nearby forest. Frey angrily says, "Didn't you say that nothing had happened recently?" Frey orders Liamson to check the surrounding area. The Tower Master was shocked to see that an arrogant elf was listening to Frey's order. Liamson returns after checking all of the nearby buildings and informs Frey that there is no one present inside the buildings and there are traces of blood everywhere. The mayor gets very angry, and he suddenly transforms into a monster. The Tower Master informs them that they are the demigod's creatures. The monsters attack the Tower Master, who is still in shock, but fortunately Isabel comes to protect him. She then conjures a fireball to kill the monsters. The monster was able to get past it and again jump toward Isabel and the Tower Master, but Frey uses his wind cutter and kills off the monsters. The mayor monster was very surprised to see Frey killing other monsters so easily. He tries to run away so he can save his life, but Liamson quickly captures him and cuts off his leg. Frey now investigates him and asks him to tell him everything he knows. The monster kept saying that he didn't know anything. Camel asks Frey to let her handle this. She also tells Frey to watch carefully as she is going to show him the spirit magic. She then uses her magic and summons a one-eyed creature. Isabel asked what this was, and Camel told her that it was a dark spirit called Goran, the best possible partner to have when extracting information from people. She orders the spirit to take over the monster's mind. The spirit forcefully goes inside the mouth of the monster. After seeing this gruesome scene, Frey says that torture would have been so much more considerate and generous. After watching Camel laugh so evilly, the Tower Master tells himself that he should never make an enemy out of dark elves. Camel then asks the possessed monster where all the villagers are, and he tells him that all of them are dead. Camel asks the reason, and the monster tells him that they were needed for the sacrifice. Frey further asks what they were sacrificing for, and the monster says to create creatures like us and liberate the power of apostles. Suddenly, a strange reaction happens in the monster, and his eyes start to glow, and his whole body self-destructs. Frey quickly uses his typhoon earrings to create a protective barrier, and tells everyone that the monster was brainwashed to self-destruct before he could spill important information. The Tower Master says the situation doesn't look good and they should head back for today. If it's an apostle who is skilled enough to create creatures, then we may not be strong enough. Frey says we must press forward because they already know that we are here. If we lose sight of them now, we won't have another chance like this. The Tower Master says that even so, we must wait for Honor Lucas to return. The Honor Lute is a 7-star magician. Facing an apostle this powerful without him is suicide. Frey says that he will replace him in terms of power. The Tower Master says that this isn't the time to let your pride control you. The 7-star stage is the stage of fusion. The Dark Elves were unaware of this and asked what it meant. So the Tower Master explains that when two opposite elements collide, it generates an enormous explosion. But a 7-star magician is able to control these natural elements and fuse them. Frey says that he is not being prideful, and he summons fire on one hand and ice on the other. The Tower Master tries to stop Frey, as they would all die if something went wrong. But Frey was able to successfully combine both fire and ice together. The Tower Master was shocked to see that, at such a young age, Frey had reached the 7-star stage. Frey again reminds everyone that he will stand in place of honor for Lucas. Now we see that it's nighttime, and all of them are still searching around to find further traces of the apostles. Camel examines a corpse and says he didn't burn to death in flames. He was charged by lightning. The Tower Master concluded that this meant that the master of the apostle is the demigod who wields lightning. Frey says a human who could use the power of a demigod is very troublesome. The Tower Master says the existence of apostles isn't completely disadvantageous for us. Frey asks him to elaborate. The Tower Master says our first apostle subjugation took place in Cascow. Back then, something we couldn't have predicted even in our wildest dreams happened. The demigod who controlled the apostles ceased to exist. Frey gets utterly shocked after hearing this, but the Tower Master says it doesn't happen every time. We don't know why it happens, either. However, we manage to determine something with those incidents. If we eliminate the apostles who receive the demigod's power, the demigod themselves will be affected by it. Fred wonders why they would use apostles if it would put them at such risk. 4,000 years ago, things like apostles didn't exist. Something changed among the demigods during that long time. After following the trail, Frey and his team reached a burnt forest, and Liamson told them that this was a dead forest. The trees and the animals are all dead. There is not even a single bug. Camel angrily says all the vitality was absorbed. How could they treat nature like this? Isabel checks the ground and says that the entire forest seems to be a trap. Some powerful barriers were set up. We won't be able to investigate further than this. Frey says that we will have to destroy everything, but Isabel hesitates about doing so. Frey further states that the forest is already dead. If it accidentally catches fire, it will reach the villages nearby. Camel also agrees with Frey. The Tower Master argues that if they try to destroy such a complicated barrier, it will take us at least 2 days. But instead of listening to Tower Master Frey, he was focusing on the trees. Camel asks Isabel about what Frey is doing, and she tells him that Frey is scanning the barrier to destroy it. Camel smiles and says Frey takes action instead of thinking for too long. He is very similar to us, the Dark Elves. Camel assures Frey that they will protect him from behind, and he just needs to focus on breaking the barrier. But Frey turns around and says he is already done with this SHT barrier. Frey then asks everyone to stay behind, and then he uses the magic spell Windstorm. The attack was so powerful that it wiped out the entire forest in one shot. Frey suddenly looks in a faraway direction and says that, with an aura that emanates divine power, he is surely an apostle. As the person came closer to the Tower Master was fucking shocked as this apostle was none other than the Honor Lucas. The apostle bastard comes closer and says, "Mikkel, my friend, did I not tell you to wait a little longer?" The Tower Master was still in disbelief and said there must be a misunderstanding. The apostle bastard says that now that you all know about my secret, you all must die. He throws a lightning bolt from his finger to kill the Tower Master, but Frey stops that incoming attack. The idiot Tower Master still says that a circle executive like him can't be the apostle of the demigod. Frey asks him to get a grip because this man is no longer the honor laureate that they served. But Frey was well aware that the apostle was not under his control. Frey goes toward the apostle and asks, why did he betray the circle? The apostle replies that Felix needs to learn some manners first. The apostle further says he betrayed God because he finally realized the demigod's power. No matter how much they fight back, humans are mere fleas in front of him. Frey gets so angry that mana starts to envelop around his body, and he says that humans are not fleas. It's the honor Lukes who don't have balls to fight back. Honor Lucas says, I didn't surrender, I just acknowledged his strength. Frey says even the other members of the circle know about the demigod's transcendent power. Do you think they are fighting back because they have no fear? They are desperately forcing themselves to stand up despite their trembling legs. They are taking step after step by clenching their teeth. They are resisting without surrendering to protect those they love. That is what humans do. That is our honor, and you abandoned that honor. The apostle summons a big lightning bolt just in front of Frey and says, I wouldn't call that honor. I prefer the term ignorance. Isabel was shocked because even without chanting and with just a single finger, the apostle was able to bring out such destructive power. He is on a completely different level. The apostle now sums up the lightning all around him and says, watch carefully. This pure lightning cannot be created through magic. Training and research are meaningless. There is no need to go to such lengths. You just need to receive his power to gain this strength. Now I have received this power, a power that transcends all 7-star magicians. Camel looks up in the sky and says that the storm clouds are forming. Is this something a human can do? Frey says it's not the power of a human, it's the demigod's power. Williamson asks Frey about the plan to defeat this son of a bitch. Frey says, let's use diversion tactics. He then orders Williamson to take the lead and make sure to protect the 3 people behind him. Frey then asks Camel to cover and support Williamson through her magic. Frey ordered the Tower Master to stand in the rear and block the enemy's divine power. But he must not make any other move and strictly only cover and protect us. He then turns toward Isabel, goes near her, and tells her something secretly. Isabel gets very shocked and says it's very dangerous, but Frey says that they don't have any time to argue. Frey pours mana into his bracelet and tells Isabel to keep her complaints for after they survive this battle. The bracelet turns into a staff and they initiate the attack. Jameson goes and makes a physical attack. But unfortunately, there was a protective barrier around Apostle. Frey uses this chance when the Apostle is distracted and uses a strong spell called Burning Ground to attack him. The ground started to shake after this attack, and the Tower Master wondered if this was Frey's true skill or just who he was. But Frey got counterattacked by lightning, and we see that the Apostle Bastard is still alive even after eating that attack. But there is some visible damage on his body due to the overuse of divine power. The apostle says that no matter how strong you are, you cannot get past this lightning barrier. Frey again attacked him with a fire burst, and then again with an ice magic spell. But the apostle was still standing there unfazed thanks to his lightning barrier. Camel says that this situation is bad because the plan was to have Frey attack him while everyone drew his attention. But now all of his attacks are concentrated on Frey instead. At this rate, even Frey can't hold on, but Isabel calms her down and says everything is going according to plan. Now we see what Frey told Isabel. If they split up, the apostle would believe that Frey would be the one who would make the final attack. But he is receiving an endless supply of power from that thundercloud. As long as that cloud exists, he will be invulnerable. The order that Frey gave her was to get rid of the thundercloud with the help of Camel and Tower Master Mikkel. Frey would be the one to become the bait, and he would leave his life in her hands. Isabel now asks Mikkel and Camel to gather as much mana as possible, as the outcome of this battle is on their shoulders. On the other side, Frey was using a lot of wide-range attack skills to focus all of the attention on himself. The apostle was laughing at Frey's futile efforts, but deep inside he was well aware that Frey has overwhelming power, which is way more than a 7-star mage, and if it weren't for the demigod's barrier, he would have turned to dust already. The apostle thinks that Frey doesn't even look over the age of 20 and is still so powerful, so it's best to nip him in the bud, because he would surely get in the way of our plans in the future. Guys, this fucking dumbass apostle thinks that Frey is a budding nip while he is a fucking giant tree. Back to story, the apostle suddenly realizes that Frey is using so many flashy attacks, even though he knows that they aren't working. The apostle realizes that Frey is blocking his vision and that the main attack is being prepared by the other 3, who are aiming for the thundercloud. The apostle attacks Isabel with his lightning and stops their magic attack preparation. The apostle prepares another lightning strike to kill them, but Frey again tries to divert the attention towards himself. but it is too late. Suddenly, James appears and blocks the attack of the apostle. Frey now goes toward Isabel to check on her condition. But to Frey's surprise, Isabel says, "Don't look down on us, just focus on the apostle Frey." Camel says, "We will definitely get rid of that shitty thundercloud." On the other side, we see that Liamson is trying to hold off the apostle, but he is totally crushed by the apostle's power. The apostle now brings Liamson closer to him and says that he will kill every single one of them. But Liamson takes this chance and attacks him using his staff. The wound was pretty deep, but because of the demigod's power, it quickly healed. The apostle angrily goes toward Liamson to kill him once and for all, but suddenly he feels a huge amount of mana. And we see that Frey has gathered a shitten amount of fire-type mana that even Charizard would look small in front of him. Frey is using every bit of mana present inside of him so that he can act as everyone's shield. Frey then asks Liamson to run away from that area and attacks the apostle with a magic spell called Lava Blast. Now we see that Frey is losing control over his body as he has used up all of his mana. And on the other hand, Liamson is utterly shocked because Frey has created a giant crater with his full power attack. Inside, from the dust, a strange figure comes out, and we see that it's the apostle who lost his hand because of this attack. The apostle shouts and says that Frey has to pay for this, and he will surely kill him. The apostle notices that Frey is trembling on the ground as he is totally out of mana. The apostle again gathers lightning and says exhausting all your mana during a battle is a rookie mistake. And this is the difference in our experience. Frey tries to stand up and says, "Are you trying to preach to me? But don't worry, I can still fight even without mana." You pathetic old man. Liamson looks at him and says this is a martial arts stance. It means Frey hasn't given up yet. Frey was doing all this because he noticed that the apostle's barrier had become unstable, and he couldn't let him recover his power. The apostle now attacks him, but Frey dodges it and beats the snot out of him. The apostle tries to get up from the ground and asks Frey, "Are you really a human like me?" Frey furiously says, "Don't compare me with yourself. You are not a human anymore. You are just the demigod's mutt." The apostle also realizes that his body isn't able to move properly anymore, so he jumps into the sky towards the thunder cloud. The apostle starts to absorb the lightning and says, "My mana is inexhaustible as long as this thundercloud exists. No matter how much you resist, you are just a mere fly. Once my mana is fully recovered, I will burn you to a crisp." Suddenly he gets a kick on his ugly face, and we see that it was Liamson who kicked him to the ground, so he can't absorb any more power. On the other side, Isabel and his team are also nearing completion of their spell, and on the other hand, both Liamson and Frey were beating the apostle's ass using martial arts. I think they are very much inspired by Rock Lee from Naruto. But the apostle uses his lightning to attack both Frey and Luke, which makes their bodies paralyzed due to electric shock. The apostle goes toward the paralyzed body of Frey and attacks him with another lightning attack to kill him. But suddenly a huge burst of mana happens around Isabel and her team as they have completed their spell. This spell attacked both the thundercloud and the apostle bastard at the same time. After this attack, we see that the apostle bastard now totally looks like a rag cloth, which we use to wipe windows. The tower master now goes toward the apostle and asks, why did he betray everyone? The apostle said that the demigod promised to bring salvation to humanity. He said that he would liberate us from diseases and our limited lifespans and make us evolve one stage higher. Frey activates his ass-hitting punches and says, if you are done talking, let's end this. But the Tower Master again requests Frey wait for just a few moments. The Tower Master says to the Apostle that your ways were wrong, but you have the same heart as USAEU raw heart that wants to save humanity. Is there no way for you to fight by our side again? The Apostle holds the Tower Master's hand and says sorry. But suddenly the Master feels that something is wrong, and we see that this Apostle is trying to self-destruct now. Both the Tower Master Mikkel and the Apostle got turned into dust after the blast. Isabel loses her temper, and she starts to cry and says, why did someone with such a kind heart have to die this way? Frey agrees with him and says that the entire world is wrong, and that is why we must fix it. Next time, you might be the one to die, or it might be me, but we must continue to fight. Even if you are left alone, fight until the end. Now it has been a few days since the incident, and we see that Frey is resting inside an inn. Isabel comes and informs Frey that Lady Camel left to visit the Fistfounder armlets. We see that Frey is checking out a weird-looking crystal. Frey tells Isabel that it's a crystal he found in the Apostle's remains, and they might be able to put it to good use. He also plans to show it to Professor Adelia, but Isabel was just sitting there with a very sad face while listening to all this information. Frey asks her here if she is still feeling down, and she apologizes and says it's the first time I've seen a companion die before my eyes. Isabel changes the topic and says, I heard that the Tower Master was part of the Fistfounder armlets. It seems like the Fistfounder armlets don't just consist of witches. Frey remembers the past, when he was also shocked by this information and asked the Tower Master about it, as he always thought that only female witches were part of that circle. The Tower Master told him that even as a secret organization, they are lacking in members, so anyone talented enough is recruited. The Tower Master also says that Frey would be welcomed with open arms anywhere he went. The Tower Master further says that the main forces of the Fistfounder armlets are composed of contractors and summoners, so they are a lot smaller in size than the other circle. But our influence is still enormous because Master Alton is the contractor for Barbastos. Frey gets very shocked and says Barbados is a Grand Duke from the demon world. The Tower Master says that Frey seems to have an interest in devils as well. The Grand Dukes of the demon world are very proud beings. They think of humans as bugs, so it is near impossible to make a contract with them. Even Frey has never seen someone who contracted a Grand Duke other than Iris. Back to the present, Frey still wonders what kind of person this Master Alton is. Suddenly, someone knocks on their bedroom door. When Frey opened the door, it was Professor Adelia who knocked. Frey says that he was just going to find her. But Professor Adele was focusing on Isabel, and she asked Frey if he had a new guest. On the other side, Isabel was also shocked to see Professor Adele here. Professor Adelia now shyly says that Elder Julian has summoned Frey to his room. She further explains that he is the Magic Tower Master. Sorry guys, there was an error from my side. Lord Mickle was the Floor Master, not the Tower Master. Now we see that Frey is standing in the office of the Tower Master, and the Tower Master introduces him as Julian Montalivo, the Master of the Third Magic Tower. The new Tower Master further says that he read your report about the mission 4 days ago. It was very well written. You recorded the Apostles' power thoroughly and in detail. The Tower Master further says that the passing of Floor Master Mickle is extremely regretful. Mickle was a loyal and devoted man. Now the Tower Master asks Frey to become Mickle's successor and take on the role of Floor Master. Professor Adele and Isabel were quite shocked after hearing this. Frey asks the Tower Master if there are other Floor Masters around his age. The Tower Master says that his brother, Miscale Blake, became a Floor Master at 26, so Frey will be the youngest in history. The Tower Master further says that the Blake house seems to have nurtured many geniuses. It shouldn't be an offer to hesitate about. Being a Floor Master has its benefits and makes your life practical. You will have an exclusive mansion and laboratory, abundant funds, and, of course, you will be able to exchange information and academic knowledge with others far more efficiently. Professor Adele pats herself on the back, thinking that her student is going to become a Floor Master. But unfortunately, Frey refuses this offer, which shocks her quite a bit. The Tower Master expected this answer and asked, "Are you planning on joining the circle?" Frey replies that this isn't the only reason, but yes. On their way back from the office, Professor Adelia scolds Frey for not accepting the offer and tells him how beneficial it is to take that position. Frey, who was getting annoyed by this nagging, changes the topic and says, "There is something I want to show you, Professor Adelia." Now inside the professor's cabin, we see that Frey is showing her the crystal he got from the Apostle. The professor was more shocked by the fact that Frey was able to defeat the Apostle. While further checking the crystal, she thought you had escaped since Floor Master Mickle died in the battle. Professor Adelia says that this crystal is completely filled with the demigod's divine power. It's just a pretty stone in this state. But if we process it properly, it will become an elixir that the Drake's heart can't compare to. Frey then asks her if she can leave this matter in your care, and the professor's eye lit up in excitement after hearing that she can make a potion out of this crystal. After a few days, we see that Camel and the other elves have returned from their expedition with a human. Camel comes near Frey and uses elf language to say that this ugly-ass human is Honor Dujanzar of the Fistfounder armlets. His personality is as awful as his face, so be careful. Camel also tells more about the other person beside him, but Mr. Ugly Ass interrupts them and furiously says, "Speak in human tongue. Stop whispering to each other like dirty old rats." The Ugly Ass comes toward Frey and says, "You must be the one. The young brat who left to subjugate the Apostle with Mickle." Tell me what exactly happened. Frey says, as my report explained, Lord Mickle drew his last breath during the subjugation due to the ugly old man again interrupts and says, are you freaking deaf? Explain the parts you omitted in the report. You fucking moron. After hearing such remarks, Liamson gets angry, but Frey calms him down. Frey's face gets very ruthless, as he is not a member of the Fistfounder armlets. You have no right to treat me like this. The ugly-faced bastard gets very angry, but the other person who came with him stops him and calms him down. This unknown person now takes out his hoodie, and he says it's been a while, Frey. And Frey also says, yes, it's good to see you again, my dear brother Heinz Blake. Guys, let me remind you that this is the same brother who was recommended as the only good person in the family by Shepherd Jun, or the father of Peru. Now we see that both siblings are inside Frey's room, and Heinz says he has heard rumors about you, Frey. They say that you are very close with Peruan from the Jun house. You have also changed a lot. Heinz comes near him and says, it seems like you have awakened. It must be because the blood runs in your veins as well. Frey looks at his brother and wonders what this guy is scheming. Heinz tells Frey that he was wrong just now and says that ugly-ass Dujins are maybe hot-blooded, but he has a high position within the circle. It isn't wise to pick a fight with him due to a momentary burst of emotions. Heinz suddenly gets serious and says people from our house will soon come to take you home, but you have to refuse them. The Blake house is a dangerous place these days. Honor Shepherd Jun must have explained the incident with our father, right? Frey then remembers about the past, where Shepherd Jun told him about how they got information about his father, Isaka Blake, being in contact with the demigod. Frey smirks and says, what are you trying to do by acting like a caring older brother? Frey further says that, if my memories serve me correctly, you didn't even treat me like a human before. Frey now thinks that while I haven't inherited Frey's emotions and feelings, I do have his memories. This man is one of the reasons Frey gave up on himself. I don't plan on resenting him in Frey's stead, but it disgusts me how he changed his attitude now that I have become somewhat famous. Heinz says I do not regret my actions in the past, nor will I apologize to you. I just truly wish you wouldn't learn magic. Frey gets surprised by this answer and asks what he means by that. Heinz does not answer him and says you shouldn't trust the circles too much. Heinz left after saying what he wanted, like a Giga Chad, and left Frey in confusion. After a while, we see an old butler giving his greeting to Frey as the young master. From the original Frey's memory, our Frey remembers that he is Alexandrio, the butler of the Blake house. Frey was also surprised that he came just after Heinz gave him a warning. Frey then starts to act like a fool and a confidence-less person, just like the original Frey, and greets him back. Alexandrio checks on Frey and thinks that other than Frey's height, he hasn't changed at all. It appears that the rumors that Frey annihilated pirates on his own and became friends with Peruan Jun are false. The butler turns around and says, Count Isaka Blake wishes to see you. Allow me to escort you back home. But Frey apologizes and says he cannot come with him right now as he has something to do. The butler was shocked as fuck to see that Frey refused Count Blake's order. The butler again reminds him and says that this is the Count's order. But Frey acts like a fucking retard and says I have some important work to do here that I cannot delay. The butler sighs and thinks that Frey really did change a bit. The butler says he understands your situation, so we will be waiting for you at the Blake house. Thank God that after Butler left, Frey again started to act like normal. After a few days, we see Professor Adelia handing some potions to Frey and saying that this was a pain in the ass to make. She further says that crystal contains some lightning energy, which is the most troublesome attribute to deal with. It cost a few hundred gold just to get the proper equipment to handle the energy. Frey smiles and will pay back the expenses, and for the payment, I can pay you with my body. But the professor didn't hear properly and said, forget it. How could I take money from a student? But if you are feeling thankful, become my assistant. Frey agrees and says, sure, I will do it in my next life. Frey then checks the bottles and asks the professor what is inside the other one. The professor says that it is a lump of lightning energy that I extracted. Frey wonders what a lump of lightning energy is. The professor says that there is no exact word or sentence to describe it. But don't open it carelessly. I bottled it up forcefully, so it will be bad if you release it. The professor further says that I just made it because I have a hunch that you might need it in the future. After some time, we see Frey inside his room, meditating. He then drinks up the potion and absorbs all of its energy. The results were beyond Frey's expectations. Now he could use his entire body as a mono room to contain this abundant amount of energy. Later that night, we see Isabel alone in the garden, and she asks Frey why he called her. She suddenly notices a peculiar-looking cat whose cuteness directly pierces her heart. Isabel then asks Frey about this new cute creature. Frey says this is a spirit known as Darkoming. Isabel says, did you already make a contract with a spirit? We have barely learned anything from Lady Camel, though. Isabel looks at the cute cat and thinks that she should also sign a contract as soon as possible. Frey says, I restrained the frozen river's energy successfully. I also learned more information about demigods. Isabel adds that you also learned spirit magic. What are you going to do from now on? Frey says we should start preparing to leave. Isabel says I understands that I will prepare our luggage tonight. Isabel further asks Frey if he is planning on entering the circles, and which one would he join. But Frey doesn't reply. Now we see that Frey is packing his luggage, but he suddenly feels a weird presence outside his door. The person on the other side doesn't feel like an enemy and is somehow friendly. When Frey opened the door, a lady in a hoodie greeted him and asked if he was Frey Blake. She apologizes to Frey for coming without notice, and then introduces herself as Benian Argentino, the circle master of the Tramen Rings. Frey invites her inside the room and then asks for what reason the circle has come all this way. She says, I came here to recruit you for our circle. Isabel asks why she is recruiting Frey even though he hasn't passed the entrance exam. Benjamin replies that there are times when we scout for incredible rookies ourselves. The other circles will also come together. Isabel smiles and looks at Frey, the incredible rookie. Benjamin then informs Isabel that she is also regarded as an outstanding rookie. She further says your battle against the apostle is already a hot topic within the circles. Even the 3 great circles and their executives are interested in you too due to your achievements. Isabel humbly says that you are exaggerating it. I was simply following Frey's order. On the other hand, Frey's eyes were fixated on Benjamin's clothes, because the cloak she is wearing is the same one he used to wear 4,000 years ago. But there was another concerning thing about her. Frey then abruptly asks Benian if she is a dragon. Benjamin gets scared by this question and asks, why do you think so? Frey replies that dragons do not have a mana room. Their hearts themselves function as energy-controlling organs. They can control the mana in nature directly to make it pass through their bodies. Frey further says that he can feel a mana room inside Benian, but he can also sense a peculiar type of unrefined mana. Benian compliments Frey, saying that he is quite knowledgeable about dragons. Frey replies that he read about them in a book. Isabel remembers that Frey told her that 4,000 years ago, when he was still Lucas, his master was a dragon. Benian tells Frey that he is half correct and says I am a half dragon, a hybrid between a dragon and a human. Guys, let me tell you that, as far as I have read the story, the dragons in this world don't have the ability to shapeshift. I don't know how she was born. After Benai went away after giving her proposal, Frey asked Isabel what she thought about her. Isabel says she was surprised by how she explained the desperate situation of the trauma rings without sugarcoating it. Usually, people try to advertise only their advantages when recruiting someone. I think she is the type of person who can't lie easily. Frey says he has a very noble character. Isabel says I didn't expect you to ask her to let us visit the Tramen Rings first. Frey says there are certain things you can only realize after seeing them for yourself. Isabel asks Frey if he is intrigued by the Tramen Rings. Frey says I don't plan on getting involved in their politics. The important thing right now is to gather our forces in a single location. Isabel realizes that Frey is not looking for a circle that will help him grow. He is looking for a focal point where the scattered circles can gather to unite. When both Frey and Isabel went downstairs, they were surprised to see the scene going on there. The ugly-faced bastard is scolding Binyang. Frey interrupts and asks what the matter is. The ugly bastard angrily says you seem to be quite a popular man, Frey Blake. The 2 new people standing there introduce themselves as Jerome Wenner of the Lucid Swords and Steve Jack of the Stro Necklaces. The ugly bastard asks Frey if he is planning to join the Tramen Rings. Frey says, what if I do? The ugly bastard says have fun loafing around in that shit place, and we can clearly see Binyang biting her lips from the anger. Guys, I think we are going to get a half-dragon waifu. The other person standing there asks Frey to visit them after having a tour of Tramen Ring. He then hands over a warp scroll that is linked to the entrance of the Stro Necklace's base. The second person also invites Frey to visit the Lucid Sword headquarters. Frey then turns toward the ugly bastard and asks, did you come to scout me as well? The ugly master asks him to follow him to a quiet place, and there are many prying eyes. He then taunts Binyang, saying that she doesn't have to come and follow them. But our cute Binyang still smiles and says farewell to Frey. Frey then asks Isabel to stay there, as he will go on his own. Now we see that both of them are inside the forest and are all alone. Frey says this place is a bit too eerie and dreary to recruit someone. The ugly bastard says, "Frey, did you think that anyone would scout a fraud like you?" Frey smiles and asks, "Then what are you planning to do?" The ugly bastard says, "A brat like you killed the apostle. That's not possible. So I will be the judge of that and check your skills." The ugly bastard activates plant magic, and a bunch of vines come out of the ground. The vine started to capture Frey, but he simply stood there and asked, "What will you do if I really have defeated the apostle?" The ugly bastard says, "You don't need to worry about that. Even if you have defeated the apostle, the same won't happen to me. You really think that all 7-star magi are the same?" "True, not all 7-star mages are the same," says Frey calmly. Frey then proceeds to exude an enormous amount of mana, which disintegrates all of the vines surrounding him. The ugly bastard was shocked to see that Frey could infuse his mana with the ice attribute. Frey calls Dujanzar an ugly bastard, like you have no right to call yourself a 7-star mage. All you have is that abandoned mana. The rest is insignificant. The ugly bastard was shocked to see that Frey did all of these without even lifting a finger. He then tries to activate flame magic, but Frey cancels it before he can activate the magic. Suddenly, ice starts to cover up the whole body of that ugly bastard. He is not totally immobilized. The ugly bastard says, "I have lost. Are you going to kill me?" Frey says, "It's not a bad idea, but I have a better one." Frey says, "I am going to give you a test. At dawn, this ice will kill you. If you are really a 7-star mage, you will have competence enough to melt it. Otherwise, you will die." The ugly bastard, "How dare someone like you test me?" But then he suddenly feels a grand aura coming from Frey. Frey turns around. "I truly believe that you will be able to overcome this." Frey now comes out of the forest, and we see that both Binyang and Isabel are waiting for him. Binyang worriedly asks if something happened, but Frey says, "Don't worry, and we can depart right away." Isabel also asks Frey if everything is okay, and Frey tauntingly says, "At least you should know me by now." Isabel says, "I am not asking about you, I am asking about the ugly bastard named Dujanzar." Frey feels a little guilty and says, "Don't worry, he won't die. Even if he isn't able to free himself, the ice will melt tomorrow. If that happens, he will feel humiliation worse than death." Now we see that they have already departed for their journey, and are currently resting and making dinner. Master Binyang offered both Frey and Isabel the soup she made herself, which was quite tasty. Isabel says that it seems like Master Binyang is quite used to camping. After just a few minutes, Frey asks for more soup, which surprises Binyang. Frey now talks about some serious topics and says that the former circle master, Ocel Argentino, was your father, right? Binyang agrees with this statement. Frey then asks, "Was he killed by a demigod?" Isabel stops Frey and says, "How can you ask such a delicate question like that?" But Binyang says that it's alright. She then says apparently there are ranking among the demigods, and the strongest of them is known as the Lord. Frey then remembers his past, when the demigod Lord sealed him in the eternal torture chamber. Binyang further says that among the demigods, there are those who have monstrous power. We call them apocalypses for convenience. Tells us that they have learned about the power of those 3 apocalypses. There are 3 types of abilities: sword, poison, and death. Binyang says that around 3 years ago, her father was killed by demigods that have the power of death. Frey remembers that he knows about the demigods that have the power of poison. That guy was really strong. The next day they reach another forest, and Binyang tells them that this is the forest where the Traman rings live. Frey looks around, says this barrier is amazing, and asks Binyang if she made it. Binyang says that she can only repair it if it's damaged, but it was her dad who built it. By looking at the barrier quality, Frey concludes that the old master was at least an 8-star mage. Frey thinks that Binyang is probably a 6-star mage. Even though she is a dragon, the epitome of magic, the reason she is at this level is because she was trained with human methods. It would be better for her to be born as a human girl. When Frey entered and looked around the village, he said it wasn't good enough to be called a hideout of the circle, and Binyang also agreed. Suddenly, a man comes running toward Binyang and informs her that while she was away from the village, they lost in a relic tournament. The other circle, named Basilisk's Tail, used this opportunity to attack again. That's it for today, guys. Please subscribe to my channel for the next part of the story. Don't forget to like and share my channel. Thanks for watching.